Thank you for appearing before us today to discuss the President's fiscal year 2025 budget request for the Environmental Protection Agency. I recently assumed the gavel of this subcommittee, and I'm privileged to be able to lead this panel's important work to advance policies which provide for environmental protection while also growing our manufacturing and industrial base. My district in southeast Georgia features over 100 miles of pristine coastline, the Okefenokee Swamp, and thriving forest lands. These are resources we cherish and strive to protect for future generations. We're also one of the fastest growing economies in the country. Billions of dollars of investment are flowing to my district, fueled by Georgia's pro-business policies, low electricity rates, and access to the ports of Savannah and Brunswick. To the detriment of my district and the stated goals of this administration, the EPA's regulatory agenda is poised to choke the prospects for increased prosperity. The recently finalized particulate matter PM 2.5 standard will gridlock permitting at new and expanded manufacturing facilities. By placing the standard so close to the natural background level, studies indicate that nearly 80% of manufacturing projects would fail to obtain a permit, including the $5.5 billion Hyundai EV battery plant in my district. Luckily, this investment received its permit before the standard was revised. China controls over 75% of the EV battery supply chain, and actions like the PM 2.5 standard threaten to tighten their chokehold on battery manufacturing. Meanwhile, the EPA, in its zealous rush to green agenda, has mandated that almost 70% of new passenger vehicles sold by 2032 will be electric. I am not anti-EV, not at all. I believe there's a market for EVs, and we should be building up our entire supply chain, including in Georgia, to reduce reliance on China. However, I am anti-mandate. The EPA's EV mandate reduces consumer choice, and its efforts to limit new critical mineral refining ties us to China and threatens grid reliability. While the administration pushes grandiose electrification visions, the EPA seems to have forgotten that electricity does not come from the plug. The illegal Clean Power Plan 2.0 threatens to shutter 16% of our reliable baseload generation that comes from coal-fired power, stranding assets, raising rates, and increasing blackouts. Section 111 of the Clean Air Act requires the best system of emission reduction to be adequately demonstrated. By mandating that states require coal-fired plants with a useful life beyond 2039 achieve 90% carbon capture by 2032, the EPA overstepped its authority and will land itself back in crosshairs of the courts. No coal-fired power plant in North America has achieved a 90% capture rate. There are no projects to demonstrate this even close to development. Guesswork is not a basis for telling states what standards to set. The EPA does not have a history of timely permitting the injection wells necessary for carbon sequestration. I note 2 states have finally allowed to do this, have permitted more injection sites in just 2 years than the EPA has in a decade, not a sign that EPA is serious about relying on this technology. I am surprised that since you are a former state regulator, the administration has not more effectively leveraged your experience and relationships with your co-regulators to states. Unfortunately, a much different relationship has been fostered, and it is my view that the agency has drifted far from the statutory principle of cooperative federalism. Last year's interstate transport rule underscores this sad situation. In the rule, the EPA denied 21 state implementation plans for ozone standards, and less than 1 month later, the agency imposed federal implementation plans on 23 states, nearly half of the country. Now the agency finds itself again in the Supreme Court, something that could have been avoided if the agency had worked with its co-regulators. Today, we will explore these regulatory topics as well as the agency's activities with this massive infusion of funding from the IRA. It is imperative that Congress conducts robust oversight of the more than $41.5 billion given to EPA in the IRA, including the $31 billion in taxpayer funds the EPA was provided for its Green Bank and Environmental Justice Block Grant programs. Administrator Regan, I appreciate our conversations and thank you for being here. I look forward to our conversation today. I now recognize the gentleman from New York, Ranking Member Representative Tonko, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Administrator Regan, thank you for being here. And thank you for all you're doing to lead the Environmental Protection Agency. I truly believe you will go down as one of the agency's greatest leaders. And that is not only because you are implementing historic funding opportunities provided by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. Undoubtedly, these laws are playing a critical role in getting the lead out of our drinking water, protecting us from PFAS, cleaning up brownfields and Superfund sites, and deploying fleets of zero-emission buses. But these are not the only reasons why these laws are transformational. It is how these resources are reaching people. For the first time ever, many disadvantaged communities, tribal communities, and community-based organizations are able to access funding that had previously been unreachable. There has been an increased emphasis by EPA on building capacity and providing technical assistance to these communities to better address historic environmental injustices. And you have led these efforts with great sensitivity and awesome commitment. I know that was the case when you worked with former subcommittee chair Bill Johnson in East Palestine. And I saw it firsthand when you met with community leaders that I represent from Albany's South End neighborhood. A robust EPA budget is critical to communities like these. The President's fiscal year 2025 budget request will continue to enable EPA to fulfill its core mission while ensuring that these historic investments are administered effectively and indeed efficiently. And based on the agency's proposed agenda and the statutory requirements, it is clear that the additional resources and personnel called for in the budget request are necessary. During the Biden administration, there has been a concerted effort to rebuild the agency's capacity to administer and oversee funding opportunities, as well as carry out the agency's regulatory and enforcement agendas. This regulatory agenda has included finalizing important environmental and public health protections to address threats that are posed by traditional and climate pollutants from power plants and vehicles, lead and PFAS in drinking water, and asbestos and other dangerous chemical substances in commerce. Simply put, each of these rules will save lives and deliver significant benefits to the American people. Not only will these efforts protect public health, but many of them are also critical to the Biden administration's Investing in America agenda, which supports the reshoring of domestic manufacturing in key strategic industries. Newly finalized standards for power plants, light-duty vehicles, and heavy-duty vehicles will drive innovation and deployment of pollution controls and clean energy technologies, many of which will be made right here in America. I believe we can compete with China and other nations, and we can do that in a way that does not require us to race to the bottom and undermine our critical environmental and labor protections. These rules are part of that effort. So, Mr. Administrator, I also want to recognize and express my appreciation for EPA's efforts to update and strengthen its scientific integrity policy. Ensuring that EPA's career public servants are able to do their work guided by science and free from political and special interests is imperative. And I believe once finalized, EPA's scientific integrity policy will become the gold standard amongst our federal agencies. This is just one part of the effort to recruit, retain, and develop the workforce necessary to carry out the agency's mission while being guided by the best available science. So, Administrator Regan, I thank you again for joining us. I look forward to working with you as EPA carries out its responsibilities to address our nation's greatest environmental challenges, including climate change, clean air and clean water, and chemical safety and environmental justice. And I do hope Congress will deliver the resources necessary in fiscal year 2025 to ensure that that agenda stays on track. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the chair of the full committee, the Honorable Chair Rogers, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Administrator Regan. We appreciate you being here today to discuss the President's budget and priorities for the Environmental Protection Agency. This committee plays a critical role in ensuring U.S. energy and economic security and leadership. For decades, America has led the world in innovation and entrepreneurship while continuing to maintain the highest environmental standards in the world. We should be proud of this legacy and work together to advance smart policies that continue to build that legacy for generations to come. But sadly, what we see today is the administration is promoting policies that dismantle that legacy. The spending and regulatory policies continue to put America on a dangerous path that threatens our economic and energy security, while enriching our adversaries, like China, and making us beholden to them for critical materials. The Biden administration and its allies have done this in ways that lack transparency and prevent accountability for their actions that threaten American manufacturing and energy resources. It's not acceptable. Since President Biden took office, the EPA has been given over $109 billion in additional funding and grown its workforce to over 15,000 employees. President Biden's budget request for fiscal year 2025 contains almost $11 billion in new funding requests for EPA, an increase of more than 8% since the current year. It's over 16% since President Biden took office. Americans are already feeling the impacts of this agenda. Since the Biden administration took office, electricity prices have risen 30%. And really, it's energy prices that are driving inflation. And that's more than 50% more than that. Electricity prices are more than 50% than overall pace of inflation. Unilateral actions like those taken by the administration are driving out affordable, reliable baseload generation needed to keep energy prices low and the lights on. Grid operators and others have been sounding the alarm, warning that the U.S. is on a dangerous and unsustainable path. Continuing this trend will mean higher prices, and what the grid experts have warned the committee about, catastrophic blackouts. It's not the American way, and it doesn't need to be this way. In addition, the auto waivers for California and other allied states, as well as federal mandates on car makers, are taking away affordable and practical transportation from Americans. Ask any car dealer. Their lots are full of EVs that won't sell, and they have limited access to vehicle models people actually want. What we've seen is a record number of rules and regulations coming out of the EPA. Over 125 major rules, resulting in over $1 trillion in new regulatory cost on American businesses, and ultimately, that's on families. And as an elected representative of the people, I note that there's a lack of accountability to the elected representatives or the people as you continue to write record rules without input from the people or their elected representatives. And I continue to believe we must authorize the EPA. EPA has never been authorized by Congress. And perhaps that's where we should be starting, to get the EPA back on mission. EPA rules are a critical part. We've seen the new PM 2.5 standard. It's going to make permitting for manufacturing and development nearly impossible. I hope you've looked at the map. We're not going to be able to site a new manufacturing plant in the United States. And I want to understand why EPA thinks that the United States is going to be able to maintain our economic leadership with these anti-manufacturing, anti-American, really anti-jobs. You're taking away opportunities from people and making us more reliant on China. That's where we're going to go. That's where we are going. We are dependent on China. If we're really serious about growing our economy, and not China's, we need predictable and realistic regulatory environment. We need EPA to actually meet statutory deadlines for new chemical reviews. We need data-driven decisions that appropriately balance a healthy environment and a healthy economy. EPA must return to a position where they're accountable to the elected representatives of the people. That's our form of government. And it's key to American leadership, to the prosperity of the people that we represent, and driving down cost for Americans. I look forward to discussing how we can work together to ensure this, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from New Jersey, Representative Pallone, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome Administrator Regan back to the committee, and thank you for being here today to discuss President Biden's fiscal year budget for the EPA. And since our last budget hearing, EPA has been hard at work protecting public health and the environment. The agency has been implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act that were delivered last Congress by President Biden and congressional Democrats, and I look forward to hearing about the agency's progress. These laws are directing investments into communities across the nation, modernizing our aging infrastructure, and helping us lead the world in the transition to a clean energy economy. So last month, the administration announced $20 billion in grant awards as part of the Inflation Reduction Act's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to deploy clean energy projects in communities nationwide. In February, the EPA announced the final $1 billion allotment of funding for a total of $3.5 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law to clean up contaminated Superfund sites. And then earlier this month, the EPA announced $3 billion in funding to replace up to $1.7 million in toxic lead service lines nationwide. And these investments are already making a difference. More than 271,000 clean energy jobs have already been created, with millions of good-paying American jobs expected over the next decade. The investments from these two laws will grow our economy and cut costs for American families. Now, the President's fiscal year 2025 request builds on the success of our historic climate laws by investing in the health, safety, and prosperity of all American families and moving the country forward. To combat the climate crisis, I'm pleased that the budget invests nearly $3 billion for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and helping communities build resilience to the impacts of a changing climate. EPA will continue to drive down potent superpollutants with key climate programs to cut methane and curb the production and use of hydrofluorocarbons. And the budget includes funding to implement achievable carbon pollution standards for fossil fuel power plants and vehicles as directed by Congress. I also commend the administration for devoting $170 million to combat PFAS pollution and increase funding to effectively implement TSCA, the Toxic Substances Control Act. And this funding will allow the agency to evaluate and manage risks from toxic chemicals to protect workers and families. This investment builds on EPA's recent drinking water standards and hazardous substance designations for specific PFAS chemicals, which will protect Americans from these forever chemicals. Now, the budget request supplements the revenue collected from the reinstatement of the Superfund tax to fund more cleanup activities. I fought for decades to reinstate this tax, and thanks to these new laws, it is once again a reality. I'm also pleased to see the budget bolster EPA's work to advance environmental justice through the President's Justice 40 initiative. Overall, I believe this budget request appropriately prioritizes the protection of human health and the environment. It demonstrates the value that Biden EPA places on ensuring access to clean air and water, meeting our shared climate goals, driving innovation in homegrown clean energy, creating good-paying middle-class jobs, and protecting American consumers by holding polluters accountable. And the budget stands in sharp contrast to the Republicans' polluters over people agenda. It's bad enough that not one Republican on this committee supported either the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act, but they've spent the last year trying to undermine these investments at every turn. Republicans are also working behind closed doors with the Trump campaign to develop a radical policy roadmap that would repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, slash the EPA, and dismantle bedrock environmental protections. And according to recent reports, Trump is selling off his policy priorities to the highest bidder, to the tune of demanding $1 billion in campaign contributions from big oil and gas corporations in exchange for executing their pro-polluter agenda. So the priorities of the Democrats and the Biden administration could not be more different, and the President's fiscal year 2025 request reflects that, difference obviously from the Republicans. Sometimes I wonder if the Republicans, even care about protecting the environment at all. So I appreciate Administrator Reagan's leadership, and I'm committed to working together to secure a more sustainable future for all Americans. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. We now conclude with member opening statements. The chair would like to remind members that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the permanent record. Our witness for today is the Honorable Michael Regan, the Administrator at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Administrator Regan, thank you for being here. You're now recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you, and Chair Rogers, Ranking Member Pallone, Chair Carter, Ranking Member Tonko, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the bold vision laid out by the U.S. EPA's proposed fiscal year 2025 budget request. Our partnership and open dialogue with Congress is invaluable for EPA to carry out its mission to protect public health and the environment. Over the last year, we've been hard at work at EPA. And under President Biden's leadership, my agency has finalized protections that will bring 100 million people cleaner and safer drinking water, free from PFAS. And we've worked hard to right many of the historic wrongs communities have faced for generations. Through our critical rulemaking, we've banned the last remaining kind of asbestos used in our country, and we've issued final technology standards that will eliminate more than 6,000 tons of toxic air pollution from chemical plants each year, slashing cancer-causing pollution from covered processes and equipment by nearly 80%, and reducing elevated cancer risk for those living near these facilities by 96%. EPA is committed to protecting public health and the environment for the American people. But more than just powerful health impacts EPA is undertaking, my agency is working hard to implement the historic laws that you have passed and President Biden's Investing in America agenda. President Biden's Investing in America agenda has not only directed investment in communities nationwide, but it has generated nearly $700 billion in funding from private sector manufacturing and clean energy projects, protecting our planet and enhancing our global competitiveness. Last May, I visited Chair Carter's district, and I was pleased to announce programs that will invest $4 billion from the Inflation Reduction Act to upgrade our nation's port infrastructure while improving air quality and protecting public health. Together, President Biden's Investing in America agenda and EPA's fiscal year 2025 budget request will continue to invest in environmental actions that will promote cleaner communities and produce economic benefits for years to come. President Biden's proposed fiscal year 2025 budget request for EPA provides nearly $11 billion to advance key priorities for the American people, including protecting air quality, cleaning up pollution, upgrading the nation's aging water infrastructure, urgently fighting the climate crisis, and advancing environmental justice. Millions of people across the country are still grappling with the effects of poor air quality, perpetuating harmful health and economic impacts. In fiscal year 2025, EPA will improve air quality for communities by reducing emissions of ozone-forming pollutants, particulate matter, and air toxics. The President's budget includes $1.3 billion to improve air quality for communities across the country, to reduce exposure to dangerous levels of radiation, and to leverage regulatory tools and public and private sector partnerships to promote environmental stewardship. EPA's work to set these standards provides certainty to industry, builds on the advancements of technology, and reinforces market movement towards a cleaner energy system that provides reliable, affordable energy. Additionally, the budget provides $100 million to expand availability of Diesel Emissions Reduction Act grants to replace older diesel engines with newer technologies. Clean and safe water is also essential for healthy communities and a thriving economy. Although substantial progress has been made, many areas across our nation still face significant barriers and challenges to achieving this goal. Aging water infrastructure, the effects of lead pipes, cybersecurity threats to our water systems, climate change, and emerging contaminants such as PFAS all pose dangerous health risks to our nation's water supply and the American people. EPA's budget request includes a total of $101 million for 2 EPA grant programs dedicated to remediating lead contamination in our drinking water. From investing into clean air to cleaning up contaminated land and water, there is absolutely no shortage of important work to be done. Members of the committee, EPA is up for the task. We're eager to work with all of you to deliver for our fellow Americans and to secure our nation's global competitiveness, but we need your support. The fiscal year 2025 President's budget continues the historic progress and investments made by the Biden-Harris administration and positions EPA to advance our vital mission of protecting public health and the environment, championing environmental justice, and again, tackling the climate crisis. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to submit this testimony for the record. I look forward to our continued partnership and yet to achieve these ambitious yet necessary goals, and I welcome all questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. We'll now begin questioning, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Administrator, if we could start with Clean Power Plan 2.0. The EPA recently finalized its greenhouse gas standards and guidelines for fossil fuel-fired power plants, and requiring coal-fired power plants that will operate past 2039 to install carbon capture infrastructure that achieves a 90% capture rate. If we talk about Section 111 of the Clean Air Act, how would you describe, in your words, what the term adequately demonstrated means, considering factors such as cost, non-air quality, health, and environmental impact and energy requirements? Again, adequately demonstrated seems to be somewhat subjective. How would you define it?
Well, I would define it in the way that we have defined it in this power sector rule, which is a technology that is available to reduce the targeted pollutants that we're after, or various technologies and best management practices that can do such. And so in this power sector rule, what you see is the opportunity for multiple technologies, but especially technologies like CCS that are receiving tax credits that the industry is investing heavily in, that we believe is competitive for reducing some of these climate pollutants.
Last week, when Ranking Member Senator Capito asked you to identify a coal-fired power plant that achieves a 90% capture rate, you didn't answer a question. Can you give us an example of a coal-fired plant in North America that adequately demonstrated a 90% capture rate over the life of its system's operation?
Well, I think we have plants that have the potential to do so. And again, this is a 90% capture rate in the future. There's a runway here for that. And so we have facilities like Petronova in Texas. We have facilities in Wyoming and North Dakota that are demonstrating at a very high proficiency rate that this is possible. So what we're looking at, again, is a runway to allow for this technology to thrive so that we can see these important reductions occur. And there are billions of dollars in the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that lay the groundwork that utilities are currently taking advantage of to meet what we believe is a reasonable goal.
So should we add on there just potentially adequately demonstrated? I mean, you say there are examples of out there that have potential to do it, but there's not one out there.
Well, we have adequately demonstrated evidence that these carbon capture technologies work and can perform at high efficiency rates. The question is, which we have a runway far out, the stringency that the rule requires, there's time to develop a pathway to do that at that level.
Okay, I'm going to take you for your word at that. If we could just go now to PM 2.5. We understand that the particulate matter standard will make it nearly impossible for new manufacturing projects, including EV battery plants. Most projects need at least 3 micrograms per cubic meter of headroom to obtain an air permit. We understand that the background concentration, the average throughout the nation is 8. With that revised standard, 89% of counties in the country now lack sufficient headroom for economic expansion. Prior to finalizing that rule, were you aware that this lack of permitting headroom would force almost 90% of the country into permitting gridlock, stopping new manufacturing?
I think we have a difference of opinion in terms of numbers. We project that when the PM NAAQS fully kicks in, 99% of counties will qualify for the levels that we've set.
How can there be that much of a difference between one side saying that almost 90% aren't going to be able to adhere to it, and you're saying 99% will be able to?
Yeah, we've modeled it out, and I would, like to
Can you
suggest-
share that model with us?
I'd love for our staff
Can I
to
share
get
an
together
example
and
with
talk
you?
about that.
We have the single largest economic development project in the history of our state in my district, and it was approved before this rule went into effect. It's the Hyundai EV plant. We're very excited about it, very excited. A $5.5 billion investment, creating 8,100 jobs. But in my district, the background concentration is 7.3, and Hyundai estimates that it would increase the concentrations by 2.5. That would put them in violation. If they were applying for the permit now, they wouldn't get it.
Well, I'd love to talk to specifics about plants themselves, because I think when you're looking backwards, yes, they've applied for a permit, they've qualified, they're there. Looking forward at the new standard, again, we've modeled this out. 99% of counties in this country will meet that standard. So there's 1% out there that we have to engage with. I would really love for our staffs to talk and engage in this conversation, because as you pointed out, there's a big gap between the stats we're talking about and the stats.
There's a big gap, and look, we're excited about this, and it would not have happened under these new rules. That's just one example there. I'm out of time. I'm going to move on. At this time, I want to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Representative Tonko, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Of the subcommittee.
That was subcommittee.
Yeah.
Did I say full committee?
Yeah,
I tried to give you a
I know you did, but I appreciate
shame
that.
Frank's not here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again, Mr. Administrator. I've already mentioned the historic funding opportunities that you are overseeing to invest in our nation to protect Americans' public health by improving water infrastructure, cleaning up our brownfields, and deploying zero-emission buses, and so much more. But you are also carrying out the agency's responsibilities to implement a complementary regulatory agenda. Recently, EPA finalized new rules related to power plants. While I certainly characterized the previously mentioned funding opportunities as historic, I'm not sure the same can be said for the 111 rules. Yes, these standards will limit carbon pollution from some power plants for the first time, but they do so in a manner that is very consistent with past EPA efforts to limit pollution. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct.
And one of the hallmarks of your leadership of the EPA has been a commitment to stakeholder engagement in the rulemaking process. Can you explain, Mr. Administrator, how EPA developed this proposal and how you sought input from technical experts, including federal partners, states, and regulated entities?
Well, thank you for the question, and I've spent quite a bit of time with industry on this rule. As you know, it really looks at reducing carbon, but also mercury air toxics, effluent waste discharge from these plants, as well as cleaning up the coal ash residue. About 2 years ago, I spent some time with industry leaders in Texas at a nationally recognized convention talking about the benefits of combining these regulations so that they don't die from 1,000 paper cuts. I don't think we're arguing with the industry over the fact that we've coupled this, because I think they like that in terms of long-term investment. I think what we are debating at times is the stringency. But we have to look at the cost-benefit analysis of this rule. The costs definitely are less significant than the benefits. And we're reducing mercury. We're reducing carbon pollutants that impact public health and the environment. And we're cleaning up our waters. So this is a very effective rule that, again, we've had a number of conversations with the industry about the technologies that are available and feel really comfortable about what we proposed.
Well, I appreciate the dialogue with the industry. And did that robust process give you confidence that this rule will reduce pollution while allowing for a reliable and affordable electric system?
Well, we've spent time with Congressman Bill Johnson before he departed on this very issue, and absolutely, we've got an MOU with the Department of Energy. We've met with grid reliability operators. We have a very strong relationship and engaged with FERC, as well as across the federal family. We know that what we propose will not impact reliability, and we believe that it is very cost effective. As a matter of fact, when we look at consumer costs, we estimate that it will increase less than 1% over the span of this rule.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about the benefits compared to the costs of this rule?
Well, listen, we're talking about lives saved, work days that are not missed, school days that are not missed, reduced levels of cancer, reduced levels of asthma. We're talking about increasing the health and vitality of not only public health, but the economy as well.
And all done in concert with the industry. On TSCA, in previous hearings, EPA has discussed the backlog of new chemical reviews. When reforming TSCA 8 years ago, Congress certainly required more work from the agency to mitigate risks posed by chemicals before they indeed enter the market. So our nation has learned that allowing chemicals to enter commerce without thorough review has, at times, led to serious harm and even death. Unfortunately, the previous administration did not set the agency up for success, and I know you and your team have been working diligently to remedy that. Everyone would like to see timely reviews of chemicals, but I want to make certain that we do so while ensuring that we are safeguarding public health. So can you talk about what you and your team are doing to address the backlog while also ensuring robust review of new chemicals? And how can Congress support the agency as it moves forward to implement TSCA?
Well, unfortunately, with some of the reductions that we're seeing in this budget, it means slower approval for new chemistries that propel our semiconductor industry, automotive industry, battery manufacturing industry, because we're just not able to keep pace. With the increases that you all had given us just 2 years ago, we more than doubled the number of new chemicals we review each month. We've cleared out more than half the backlog cases, and we've prioritized the new chemistries that the industry has asked us to do. And so we're making progress. And right now, it's just not the opportune time to reduce that funding, considering the progress that we're making on TSCA.
Thank you. Well, it sounds like it's indeed a function of human infrastructure to implement TSCA, so appreciate the leadership again. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Representative Rogers, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Administrator Regan, EPA's recent regulatory actions put the agency in the middle of states' responsibilities to assure an electric generation mix that provides reliable, affordable power for their citizens. The Clean Power Plan 2.0 requires states to impose costly and unproven performance standards on new and existing power plants. You just testified that no system right now has adequately demonstrated to capture 90%. For existing plants, you rely on the same subsection of the Clean Air Act that the Supreme Court said could not be used to force a transition to new generation sources to usurp state authorities over their electricity systems. Administrator, is it the EPA or the states that ultimately decide what the appropriate emissions standards will be for existing plants?
For existing plants, so you're talking about coal or natural gas?
I'm talking about existing plants across the board.
Well, this rule only addresses existing coal. It does not address existing natural gas.
So is it EPA? Is the answer yes? It's going to be EPA, not the states, determining what's the appropriate emission standard? Is that what I'm hearing?
What we do is we set federal standards and we work with our co-regulators to design state implementation plans to meet that. That's the way it's always been done. That's the way that Congress wrote the Clean Air Act.
If I may take it back, Congress gave states, Congress gave states broad discretion to implement emission standards for existing power plants. Under your new rule, if a state chooses a less stringent standard, the state must demonstrate to EPA why its assessment is fundamentally different than EPA's assessment. How do you justify EPA, through the Clean Power Plan 2.0, taking discretion away from the states?
As a former state regulator, I can assure you that we have not taken any power. There's always been a co-regulation relationship that exists between the states and the federal government, and states have delegated authority to execute and implement these federal laws. We like to give states flexibility, so I'm not quite sure the way you're positioning the question is not factually correct. As a former state regulator.
If I may take this back, under the rule, if EPA could take away states' authority over their power generation with a federal implementation plan.
There is no taking. I just reject the premise that the federal government is taking anything from the states.
Is EPA going to issue a federal, if it disagrees with the state's implementation plan, will EPA issue their own plan then?
That is the authority Congress has given to EPA.
So EPA, Congress gave the authority to the states. EPA is taking it away.
Congress
and you've written a rule that the courts said could not be used to force a transition to new generation sources or usurp states' authorities.
That's just not factually true. We have not written a rule.
Okay, we're going to set that aside then.
Oh, okay.
I want to get to, well, I have a problem with a lot of things that are going on right now. EPA, billions of dollars for a clean school program that has gone almost entirely to electric vehicles, contrary to the statute. $27 billion in a green bank giveaway to groups littered with Democrat political operatives. I guess you described them as investing in America. EPA has avoided audit thresholds by manipulating the amount of grants awarded, hundreds of millions of dollars to regional grant makers under an environmental justice program, and those grant makers are not even located in the regions that they're intended to serve. But I want to get to home in Eastern Washington, because EPA recently listed Lake Roosevelt above Grand Coulee as a Superfund site. And this is going to have huge impacts on the communities that I represent. So I'd like to ask you, Mr. Administrator, why did EPA refuse to give the communities a chance to do the studies and work together to clean it up?
We didn't. The listing of this site, according to our federal authority, helps us expedite the cleanup because it unlocks federal funding when we list these national sites.
Can I ask you a question about funding then? Because the White House recently announced the Columbia River Basin Settlement, which was negotiated by the White House. It says it includes efforts to target at Superfund sites. Does the EPA plan to use some of this money from the settlement to fund the cleanup of the upper Columbia River?
It's my assumption not only will we use settlement dollars, but we can unlock the billions of dollars in the bipartisan infrastructure law to help these Superfund sites expedite their cleanup all over the country. That's the
Okay.
purpose of the program.
Yet to be seen. Thank you, Mr. Administrator. For years, everything from old tires to raw sewage has been dumped into Puget Sound. This is destroying the salmon populations in Puget Sound. Salmon runs are in decline. Will EPA commit to enforcing the federal water quality standards being ignored in Puget Sound before continuing down a path of breaching the Lower Snake River dams?
Will we enforce federal standards?
Yes, because it hasn't been done for as long as I've been in Congress in Puget Sound, the federal water quality standards in
We
Puget Sound.
absolutely will enforce congressionally
I'm
authoritated
waiting. I'm
federal
waiting.
standards.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the former chair, our former ranking member of the full committee. Some things changed while you were gone. The ranking member of the full committee, gentleman from New Jersey, Representative Pallone, for 5 minutes of questioning.
You can call me whatever you like. Congress successfully reinstated the Superfund tax in the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. But last year, the tax brought in more than $1.2 billion in receipts, and this represents significant savings for American taxpayers, despite being lower than Treasury's estimates. But that's what I wanted to ask you, Administrator. I understand Treasury is responsible for estimating Superfund tax receipts each year. How is the EPA adapting to significant discrepancies between the Treasury forecast and the actual Superfund tax receipts?
Well, we are continuing to collaborate very closely with our partners in Treasury. And as you've mentioned, the projections that Treasury gave us fell short this time. And so we're fine-tuning that system, which is why in this budget, we are asking for $300 million in appropriated resources. We believe that we can take that $300 million plus those tax receipts that we have seen come in and keep pace in terms of cleaning up these Superfund sites, in addition to some of the resources that you all have allocated through bill. The demand is higher than the resources that we have. Many of our communities are not as economically as vibrant as they could be because they're not as clean as they could be. And so we believe that we can make up for that gap with this appropriated request, and then the future will be brighter in terms of funding this program through tax receipts.
Well, I appreciate that, and I do actually support having additional appropriations for Superfund. You know, my fear always is, well, now we get the money from the tax, and therefore we lag on the appropriated amount. So I'm glad that this is $300 million more than last year, right, from what I understand. Well, let me ask you, what would happen to these cleanups if EPA does not receive the full amount requested, including that $300 million?
Well, unfortunately, we'll see a slowing in our ability to clean up these Superfund sites. I think that South Plainfield, New Jersey would have to wait on the cleanup of PCBs. We know that we can do it. We have the expertise. We just need the resources to keep pace. And again, when we are able to list these communities, do this work as quickly as possible, we see our communities bouncing back, not just from a health standpoint, but from an economic development standpoint as well.
And let me say, I understand you're saying you need the extra 300 because of lagging or possible lagging Superfund receipts, but I support additional funding from appropriations beyond that anyway, because we always need more money, and I don't want appropriations to just make up for the Superfund receipts. I think we should be doing both, frankly. I also wanted to applaud the decision to designate PFOA and PFOS as hazardous substances under Superfund. But I understand that you released a separate enforcement discretion policy to make it clear that the agency will focus its enforcement on the polluters who significantly contribute to the release of PFAS into the environment. So what does that mean? In other words, I know the water utilities, the farmers, they're concerned. Does this separate enforcement policy make it clear that we're talking about manufacturers? What are the different groups that you're talking about here?
Well, I appreciate that question, and we have authority to have this discretion, which we've used before, whether it's regulating lead or other listed pollutants. But I want to be very clear that we are focused on the polluters. We are focused on the manufacturers that have deposited this into our water, into our air. This enforcement discretion policy makes it very clear that we have the discretion not to pursue or go after the farmers, the water systems, those who are also being victimized by the dumping of this PFAS as well. So we wanted the public to be clear of who we were pursuing and who we're not.
Well, thank you. One last question I want to say, obviously, I would like to see all the PFAS elements, designated as hazardous substances. I know that's difficult because there's so many, and you've designated now PFOA and PFOS, but are we going to see other elements of PFAS also designated at some point? Is that what's going on?
We will. I think when we look at cleanup and PFAS in our drinking water, we are pursuing the processes, the proper processes to look at the health and the economic impacts of these forever chemicals, and we will go through a rulemaking process. We've done that for cleanup for these two. We've done 6 for drinking water. We have 29 more listed, and so we're making our way through that list. Too many people have been impacted by these pervasive forever chemicals, and we're going to stay focused on the job.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all you do. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Representative Palmer, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act, I call it the Income Reduction Act, provided $27 billion for a Green New Deal bank that the EPA is administrating. I asked one of your senior advisors, Mr. Zeeland Hoover, if he could guarantee that none of that $27 billion would wind up going to China. And his response was that that answer is a little more complicated rather than give me a simple yes or no. Is that, do you think that question is too complicated?
What I would say is that the program is designed for all of that money to be invested domestically.
Yeah, it's designed for that, but that's not the question. It's a simple yes or no. So will any of that money wind up going to China, any of its affiliates, any of its manufacturers?
The program is designed.
No, sir, it's a yes or
for it
no.
to be no, it's
I
not a
mean,
yes or no
yes,
question.
it is, because we already know
If
that
someone
No, no,
inappropriately invests money and it gets to China, there will be repercussions to that.
Yeah,
So the
well,
program is designed for
China
domestic
controls 70%
investment.
of the cobalt, 75% of the world's lithium-ion battery megafactories are in China. They control the refining of 68% of the nickel, 59% of the lithium, 73% of the cobalt. There is no way that you can say that none of that money will wind up in China, because we can't make that stuff without parts from China. We don't process critical minerals or rare earths over here to any great degree. We don't have a major refinery, and as a matter of fact, there's not one in the Western Hemisphere to my knowledge. So there's no way you can say that. Let me ask you this: how much have you budgeted for the administration of that $27 billion through the EPA bank? As far as I know, the EPA never really had bankers. So how much are you spending of that $27 billion just for the administration of it?
Well, Congress allotted a very small amount of the $27
But
billion.
I asked you how much you're spending. I didn't ask you how much Congress allotted.
We're only spending what Congress allotted for us to use for the program.
Okay, we'd like for you to give us a hard number on that. I'd like to ask you something else. This report's 9 years old, but there was a report from Open the Books about the number of special agents that the EPA hired, the weapons that they're provided with. At that point, you had stockpiled over 600 guns, 500,000 rounds of ammunition. You had a whole host of military equipment, camouflage and other deceptive equipment, night vision, passenger troop transport vehicles, unmanned aircraft, and some pretty large caliber artillery type shells, anti-tank type shells. Do you still have that?
You read off a huge list of things that I
Do
don't
you have any military style weapons?
I don't have an inventory. In fact, we don't have any weapons that Congress has not allowed for our agents to use.
I didn't ask you that. I asked you, does the EPA possess
We can get you a
military style
full
weapons?
accounting of the inventory of weapons that our agents
I
lawfully and
expect
legally
that.
have.
I expect that. Let me ask you this. Do you believe the EPA has the authority to make laws?
Absolutely not. We enforce laws and
Okay, let me ask
we
you
implement
this.
laws.
If you're issuing rules and guidance and someone fails to adhere to that, are there criminal penalties?
We're only issuing guidance
No.
and regulations.
You're not answering the question. I will ask another member to yield time to me if I have to, but you need to answer the question. If someone violates an EPA rule or guidance, are there criminal penalties?
Yes.
Okay, how's that different from a law?
We don't make laws.
yeah.
Congress makes laws. They give us the authority to write regulations and rules. And if you don't abide by those regulations and rules,
the
there are penalties.
The Supreme Court in EPA versus West Virginia kind of rolled that back. I know that that's hard on you guys because you really disagree with that. And if the Supreme Court does the right thing and dispenses with the Chevron deference, it's really going to fall back where it should to the people's elected representatives instead of allowing bureaucrats at the EPA or any other federal agency to make laws that bypass Congress, and that's really what's going on here. My friend from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, will have some other questions about some of the things that are going on, particularly the methane tax and things like that. But what the EPA has done is it has grossly overstepped its bounds, and then it's enforcing these laws with armed agents that show up full body armor, weapons drawn. I know this for a fact because it happened in Dothan, Alabama, with the city waterworks. I could give you a whole list of that if you'd like for me to provide a list. So I'm very
absolutely
concerned. Okay, I'll tell you, it's in Alaska, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and like I said, Alabama.
Yes, I would.
You need to
because
look into this.
When we service these enforcement actions, we're doing it with other law enforcement agencies.
You
This
did
happens-
not do it.
This happens
You
time
did
and
not
time
do it
again
in
for
Alabama.
Homeland Security
You did
and
not.
others.
You could have called the U.S. Marshals, you could have called the state troopers, the local county sheriff, and you did not do it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, Representative DeGette, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you so much. Administrator Reagan, I myself want to thank you and your entire agency for the work you do to protect the health and welfare of all Americans, and in particular, my constituents. And I want to apologize for the unnecessary abuse that you are suffering in this hearing from some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, asking you questions that have multiple parts that you can't possibly answer in order just to get a soundbite at. So I apologize for that. And I also think it's kind of ironic that my colleagues are 100% opposed to what the EPA does, unless, of course, it's cleaning up environmental contamination in their districts. And then they want to know why you didn't do it yesterday, even though they keep trying to cut your budget. So you don't have to respond to that. I just want to let you know it does not go unnoticed. Mr. Palmer was referring a little bit to methane, and I want to talk to you just for a few minutes about methane, because it's something I've worked a lot on. Methane is responsible for about 1/3 of the current warming our planet is experiencing. Is that right?
It is.
And it's true that oil and natural gas operations are our nation's largest industrial source of methane. Is that right?
It is, yes.
Now, in 2021, June of 2021, President Biden signed into law a Congressional Review Act invalidating the Trump administration's 2020 methane rescission rule, which tried to block EPA's authority to regulate methane from existing sources. I led the effort to invalidate this rule on the House side, and what it did was it reinstated 2 Obama-era methane emissions rules that set stricter limits on the amount of methane the oil and gas industry can release from drilling sites. Now, so Administrator Reagan, the administration's final methane rule addresses emissions from both new and existing oil and gas operations. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
And this enforcement the EPA takes, it's within the purview of the authorities that is given to it by Congress. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, why is it important to address existing sources of methane in the oil and gas industry?
Well, these existing sources, as you've correctly pointed out, are some of the most potent contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, which are exacerbating not only climate disadvantages, but also disparate impacts to health as well. And so we're focused on these existing sources and these new sources because we're reducing not only methane, we're also capturing the volatile organic chemicals and other toxic pollutants that are disproportionately impacting neighborhoods around them.
That's right. And speaking about some of those neighborhoods, it's not just methane. In many districts, including mine, there are really vulnerable communities. Typically, they're low-income, disadvantaged minority communities. They face multiple sources of pollution that compound upon one another, which has a negative effect on a community's health. And I think you know about one of those communities, Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, which is in North Denver. And I invited you to come there. I think you went there, but I was voting. So I'm inviting you to come back with me to see some of the impacts there. I'm wondering what actions EPA plans to take to alleviate the environmental and health risks of cumulative impacts for environmental justice communities.
Well, we're laser focused on these cumulative impacts coming from multiple sources. Thankfully, we've started cross-programmatic efforts to take into account cumulative impacts. But Congress, through the Inflation Reduction Act and bill, have given us the resources to empower communities to also help us help them with solutions that they've had for decades. So we have carrots as well as sticks in order to encourage the best behavior possible to reduce these pollutants.
And how does the fiscal year 2025 budget, in tandem with these investments that you just referred to, allow the EPA to work towards achieving those goals?
Well, it helps us to really focus on the areas that were not funded by Bill and IRA. We have some very core programs, whether it's looking at our emergency response. We have situations, unfortunately, like East Palestine or like the bridge in Baltimore or the wildfires in Maui. We want to keep pace with TSCA to be sure that we don't have some of these chemicals that are not the best out on the market and give us the ability to review and put new chemicals out there. We want to be sure that some of these congressionally mandated projects that are happening in districts all across the country have the technical resources and availability to carry out that spending. And so we really need some core functions that benefit from the appropriated budget that were not accounted for, nor should they have been in the Inflation Reduction Act and bill.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the vice chair of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Representative Joyce, for 5 minutes of questioning.
First, I want to thank Chairman Carter for holding today's hearing and Administrator Regan for coming to testify. I've become very concerned about the punitive regulations and mandates that the Biden administration, especially the EPA, have come out with recently. I represent one of the poorest congressional districts in the country. Over 100,000 families in my district live on less than $50,000 a year, and that's the average cost of an EV. Administrator Regan, I think that we share concern of the high energy costs impacting people who can least afford it. Are you not worried that your latest onslaught of regulatory actions will only serve to increase the heating and the transportation costs for those who are most economically vulnerable?
We've taken a look at all of that.
And do you share that concern with me, that the vulnerable will be most impacted?
Well,
Say yes or no.
we've shared the concern throughout the process.
I think we all have to share
which is
that
the way-
concern
which is why
for
we
the most
designed the
vulnerable. I think that's
regulations.
part of our mission statement. Moving on, I would like to ask a few questions related to one of the mandates, the California's request for Clean Air Act waiver to implement the ACC2 program, which would ban the sale of internal combustion engines by 2035. Administrator Regan, states that align their vehicle emissions and standards with California standards, such as New York and Washington, represent approximately 40% of the auto market. Based on that fact, would you agree that the regulatory impacts of this rule go beyond California, impacting other states as well?
Well, California legally has the ability to petition us or submit a waiver. We legally have the obligation to review that, and so we're reviewing all of the waivers.
And
that
do you agree
California
that
has
these
submitted.
regulatory impacts go beyond California?
Well, we'd have to take a closer look at these waivers. Each waiver is being looked at individually and are under consideration right now.
So putting aside whether these impacts are good or bad for Americans, would you agree that granting a Clean Air Act waiver to California will generally have significant impact on the U.S. economy?
Well, again, it would depend on the waiver that has been submitted, but I've pledged to follow the law, and the law gives California the right to submit waivers, and EPA legally has to review those waivers.
EPA's national tailpipe emissions mandate mentions ACC2 13 times. 13 times it's mentioned. Do you agree it appears to be significant enough for EPA to use it as justification for a national emission standard?
We did a separate focus on our national standard that was supported by the big autos, the Auto Alliance, the UAW. So EPA's efforts were independent. We take into consideration all states, whether they be.
And yet you took time to mention 13 times the ACC2 mandate. That's mentioned 13 times in the national tailpipe emissions mandate. That has to have impact of your decision-making process.
Whether you're in North Carolina or California, we've taken every state into consideration. It's a national law, and we focused on it being nationally appropriate.
When Assistant Administrator Goffman testified before this committee just 9 months ago in June of last year, he stated that EPA's understanding is that, quote, auto manufacturers have striven to avoid more than just one national fleet. Do you agree that auto dealers will have to alter their national fleet to make the emission standards set by California and others in Section 177?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that question, so we'd have to get you more details on it.
I look forward to the follow-up there. If this rule has significant economic impact, and I think we agree it does, and affecting consumers and markets in multiple states, will that impact competition and innovation in domestic markets? And would you agree that this qualifies as a major role?
What I would say is California has submitted a waiver that we're evaluating. I can't give you an answer on the finality of the waivers because we haven't approved or disapproved those waivers.
Administrator Regan, during a hearing in front of this committee last year, you told me personally, unequivocally, that you do not support a ban on new internal combustion engine vehicles starting in 2035. That was your answer to me. Do you still oppose a ban on new gas-powered cars?
Absolutely, and we have not proposed a rule or finalized a rule that bans internal combustion engines.
When your agency considered California's ACC2 waiver, did you find that the regulatory impacts of the ACC2 waiver were significantly greater than the impacts that EPA analyzed during their reconsideration of the waiver withdrawal for ACC1 in 2022?
I'll have to get back to you on the specifics.
These
of
are
these
two
waivers.
areas that I would really appreciate that you do get back to us. My constituents are affected by this. America is affected by this, and your follow-up is welcomed and expected. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois, Representative Schakowsky, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much, Administrator Regan. I want to say how much I appreciate your agency and the work that you do. And I also want to give a shout out to Deborah Shore, who is our Region 5 administrator, a good friend on all the work that she has done, including in East Palestine when she went personally to deal with that issue. Your team is just fantastic. I'm from Chicago, so I have a special interest in that. So I have two issues that are important to my district, and I wanted to bring them to your attention and see what the EPA is doing. Soot pollution certainly is a big problem for us. 1 in about 10 Illinoisans experiences asthma. That's a lot of people, and when it comes to children, there are communities when 1 out of 3 children suffer from asthma. And the other are lead service lines. Illinois has the second largest number of these lead service lines. There's about 1 million of them in Illinois. We're making some progress, and I want to thank the EPA did make a contribution to our doing that, but we have a long way to go. And that means that our children and families are drinking water that could produce lifelong consequences when it comes to health. And I know that the health and safety of our people is number one. I'm wondering if you could comment on both of those.
Well, yes, and thank you for that question. And in addition to what I said about the PMNAGs being fully implementable by 99% of counties in this country, We know that that rule will prevent close to 4,500 premature deaths and eliminate close to 290,000 lost workdays. That, by our estimate, equates to about $46 billion in health benefits. Very significant. We have too many mothers that I personally met with whose children are drinking lead-poisoned water. We are thankful for Congress's approval through the bipartisan infrastructure law of $14 to $15 billion for lead replacement. I believe just this year, Illinois will receive about $240 million going towards lead replacement.
Thank you for that.
Your state was very competitive and proved that they knew how to spend that money responsibly, identified those lead pipes, and we want them out. The president has pledged 100% lead pipe removal, and we're going to do everything in our power to see that vision through.
So that's lead pipes, but also the issue of the soot pollution. I know that you've had approved a stronger rule, and there was some criticism about that. I think it's so important. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and that was what I was referring to in terms of the NAAQS rule that I was referring to earlier, which that is where we get those lives saved, that avoiding 4,500 premature deaths. For nearly $1 spent from that rule, we could see as much as $77 in human health benefits by the year 2032. Soot is such a dangerous pollutant for so many people in this country, especially those who have respiratory challenges already. And so it is incumbent upon us to eliminate that pollution. And if we see this pollution going from state to state, we have the federal authority to help states manage that pollution and rein it in. It's about fairness and transparency. And we want to be sure that every state is doing its fair share not to pollute their own communities, but definitely not communities in neighboring states.
Thank you for that. I just want to say, we have heard, particularly from my Republican colleagues, criticism of some of the spending by the EPA. And I want to thank you for that spending, because the priority then is the health of our community, our environment, the things that you are doing. And often what I hear in the hearings is corporate interests who say that they're going to suffer. I think you're on the right page, and I appreciate your work. I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Representative Weber, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Regan, when you came here today, I don't mean to pry, but did you bring one of those gas-powered automobiles you're so much in favor of, or did you bring the train, ride the train like the Federal Triangle?
I came with my security detail.
Was that a gas-powered vehicle that
Yes.
that you're in favor of?
Yes.
Okay. In your exchange with Diana DeGette, she asked you if the oil and gas industry was the largest suppliers of methane, and you said yes, you agreed.
Yes.
Okay. So would you also agree that the oil and gas industry is the largest provider of energy to the American public so that they can freely move around from their home to work, to vacation, and shopping, and help encourage the economy to grow? Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
And is it true that the oil and gas suppliers are also the largest suppliers of energy to our great American military?
I believe that is correct, yes.
Well, I hope so. They pump it out of the ground, so they got to get it somewhere. So, and they protect America, and our great military protects America and Americans and our allies. You'd agree with that?
I do.
So the oil and gas industry provides a pretty good function, wouldn't you agree?
Well, absolutely, and we designed our rulemaking with that absolutely in mind.
And then you also had Dr. Joyce, who said that has implications for the economy, and you agreed with that as well.
We take that into account with everything we do.
So my question really is, one of the things that has happened under the TSCA, or Toxic Substance Control Act, recently the EPA released a final rule directing how TSCA risk evaluations should be done, and the rule removed, quote, the definition for, quote, the best available science, thereby undercutting the requirement in the law that Congress passed. So while you recognize that the oil and gas industry plays a very viable function in a myriad of ways, that's very, very important for Americans and for the economy, and indeed for our military and for security, not just for Americans, but for our allies. Don't you feel kind of strange that removing that from the rule has absolutely overridden Congress's intent when they wrote that law?
Removing, you said the best available
The
science?
rule removes the definition for, quote, best available science, end quote, which thereby undercuts the requirement that Congress wrote into law.
I'm not quite sure in what context that's written.
The
because
TSCA Act.
We absolutely, in TSCA and everything we do, use the best available science, the best science available, scientific integrity. So I'd have to have a little bit more context in how that frame's being used.
Well, then, if you don't mind, let's get back to me on that. But I do want to get you on record, if I can. You would agree that if EPA overrode Congress's desire in rulemaking, that something would be wrong with that picture?
We absolutely want to stay in line with Congress.
So you strive diligently all the time to make sure that y'all follow the wishes of Congress?
Yes, we try not to ever exceed our congressional authority.
Do you ever raise a flag if y'all look at something and you think that it's not practical or that it would hurt the American public or American industry or American military?
Absolutely, and I think a number of CEOs in this country would say that I have.
Who do you report that to?
Report.
When you have an issue, you want to raise a flag, who do you communicate that to?
It depends on the issue. Give me an example.
Well, for example, the rule from TSCA, for example, if y'all removed the best science available, that has implications that you overrode Congress's original law. So who do you communicate with on
Yeah,
that?
I'm not conceding at all that we remove the best available science.
Okay, but if you did, it would be an issue.
Yes, if we did, it'd be an issue.
And then who would you go
our-
to?
More than likely, our Inspector General would be investigating that.
Okay, but if you personally, if that was a concern, you would raise that issue to the IG?
Well, if it was a concern by me, number one, I'd raise it to those who report directly to me to get to the bottom of it. But
Okay.
two, I met with my IG just last week. We have a great relationship, and yes, we pursue full transparency on any exceedances of the
Okay,
law.
well, I want to make sure that you keep the American public first and foremost, and then American industry too. You know, the health of the American public is important, and industry too, they have to make money. Then our great military has to have energy, so we don't want to do things that, you know, hamper the energy industry. Earlier this month, EPA finalized Subpart W revisions that would add a new emissions category, which shift to a site-specific measurement, utilize parametric monitoring, and revise estimation methodologies for pneumatic controllers and pumps. Did the EPA consider the significant financial liability assumed by oil and gas companies, again, industry, when you do that? And I'm out of time, so get back to me on that because it's important. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Representative Sarbanes, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Regan, I think you're doing a terrific job. Keep it up. It's not easy, but the Biden administration is setting the standard we need if we're going to protect our environment, combat climate change, and do what's right for the planet. So thank you for that. As you know, we're at a very critical point in the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay, the nation's largest estuary, one of the most productive bodies of water in the world, and it's an invaluable natural and cultural resource. In 2014, the 7 jurisdictions in the watershed, Maryland, Virginia, D.C., Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Delaware, and New York, came together with the EPA to sign a new Chesapeake Bay watershed agreement that set goals and outcomes to restore the bay by 2025. Much of the implementation of the Bay Agreement is managed through the unique regional partnership of EPA's Chesapeake Bay program, as you know, which coordinates restoration efforts across states, agencies, and stakeholders. There's just no substitute for EPA's role here, which is both as an enforcer of pollution reduction targets and a valued convener of all the partners who have committed to reaching our restoration outcomes. And recently I met with Adam Ortiz, who's the Region 3 Administrator, of course you know that, and Martha Shimkin, who's the Director of the EPA Chesapeake Bay program, to talk about this very, very important role that EPA plays. Could you just describe some of the goals that the Bay program is pursuing with the record level of appropriations we've been able to muster here, as well as the supplemental funds from the bipartisan infrastructure law?
Well, thank you for that question, and congratulations on your retirement. We're going to miss your leadership. I would say that since 2022, we've awarded more than $114 million in bill funding to accelerate all of the programs that are designed to protect this national treasure. And we are very fortunate with some of the regional leadership that we have and the scientists that we have on board to engage as many of us engage as many of our partners as possible on the science, on the economics, and on the latest and greatest best management practices and technologies to restore the Bay. As we look beyond 2025, because obviously we have fallen short of those goals we set, we are excited to prepare recommendations for the Chesapeake Executive Council this fall, which will contain a lot of recommendations for the very things that we've done and the lessons learned there. So we have been laser focused on this. We've worked with all of the states surrounding to reduce their pollution into the Bay. And we recognize not only the ecological and ecosystem dynamism of the Bay, but also the economic and the recreational aspects as well.
Thank you. Obviously, looking beyond 2025 now is absolutely critical. The Bay Partnership has an opportunity this year, led by the Bay Program, to lean into the restoration effort, reaffirming, updating the Bay Agreement, keeping it strong and robust, incorporating new science, streamlining administration, and revising goals according to what we found works to clean up the Bay and its waterways. I assume you would like to see a very robust update of the agreement between the Chesapeake partners.
Absolutely.
The expectations are high, I want you to know, certainly within our delegation, but I think beyond, if you look at members of Congress who are served from the watershed, the kind of geography of the watershed, they bring high expectations of the EPA's role, what it can do to, again, as I say, lean into the new horizon when it comes to strengthening these protections of the Bay and meeting important goals and setting important goals, and using the authority that the EPA has under various authorities, et cetera, to make sure that everybody is cooperating, that the convener role is as strong as it can possibly be. You mentioned the Chesapeake Executive Council coming up in December, which is made up of the signatories to the Bay Agreement. That's going to be happening in Annapolis. It's to decide what the next steps are for meeting those expectations, those high expectations beyond 2025. Having you personally join that meeting would send a very powerful message about EPA's and your support for the Bay cleanup, and I'd love to get a commitment today that you'll attend in December. Is that something that you're planning to do?
It's on the radar. The date hasn't been selected, but we're going to do our best to time that date with our schedule.
I would give it the highest priority if you could. I think, again, it would send a very powerful message. I think your absence from it might unfortunately send the counter message in terms of focus. So would love to see you there. Again, I want to thank you for your leadership in restoring this national treasure that we certainly cherish in Maryland. And thank you for your good work, and look forward to collaborating as we move forward. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Representative Balderson, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator, thank you for being here today. Administrator, the EPA has claimed it addressed the reliability concerns posed by its recently finalized Section 111 power plant rule, the so-called Clean Power Plan 2.0, by including minor tweaks such as allowing a one-year compliance deadline extension subject to EPA's approval. But utilities need to start making resource decisions today and can't bank on the so-called flexibilities. And if a plant is shut down because of this rule, it can't just be turned back on in an emergency situation. The fact is, the power plant rule will threaten greater reliability. Just last week, the largest grid operator in the nation, PJM Interconnection, which covers the state of Ohio and the Ohio's 12th Congressional District, made it clear this rule threatens reliability. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter to the record the PJM's May 8th statement on the newly issued greenhouse gas regulations, please.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator, do you believe that you and the EPA are better experts on what is needed to maintain grid reliability than the actual grid operators?
Well, I think we've made our decisions with consultation from the grid operators, FERC, and others who specialize in grid reliability, along with our own experts.
Is it in your opinion that PJM is wrong in their assessment of this rule will threaten the grid reliability?
I'd love to read that report and have my staff analyze the threats that they perceive to be there. We consulted with PJM, so we'd love to continue to engage with PJM.
If you could, let us know what your thoughts are after you and your staff read that. In the light of these serious concerns from PJM, will you commit to asking the North American Electric Reliability Corporation and the RTOs, the ISOs, for an independent review of the reliability impacts of this regulation and the others EPA recently finalized on fossil fuel-fired units?
We look forward to a lot of engagement with multiple industries and entities that are responsible for the grid and delivering power. So those conversations will continue to go.
Thank you. In the state of Ohio, new data centers, I'm sure you're hearing about this, and manufacturing sites are adding significant demand on the grid. Just this week, AEP Ohio said they have agreements for new demand from existing and additional customers to add 4,400 megawatts of power to Central Ohio by 2030. The EPA's final power sector rule will lead to the premature retirement of reliable generators and prevent new gas resources from coming online as demand is growing rapidly. This is a disaster, recipe for disaster. 2 weeks ago, the Secretary of Energy repeatedly told the committee that EPA's new power sector rules for greenhouse gases no longer included standards for existing natural gas plants. She failed to mention that those standards are coming. In the new power sector rules, EPA states it intends to issue a new, more comprehensive proposal regulating greenhouse gases from these existing sources. EPA says that the proposal will focus on achieving greater emissions reductions from the sources. Will this future rule on existing natural gas-fired plants be more strict than the Section 111 rule that EPA finalized last month?
The reason we have given more time is because industry, the environmental community, justice community has asked us to, and so it will be more comprehensive, meaning the proposed rule only had the largest included. We're looking at a more comprehensive approach, but we're also looking at additional flexibilities and additional technologies that the industry asked for us to consider. So we're starting a more elongated process to be sure that we have a more comprehensive look, and that comprehensiveness goes towards coverage as well as technologies, best management practices, and the like.
Okay, thank you. So the EPA has only received a few comments so far, and given the impact of the rule covering existing gas plants will the EPA extend the deadline for comments?
I will circle with my staff about where we are with the process and the comments that are coming in and what we need to do to accommodate a full engagement from all of our stakeholders, because we need that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Administrator. I do appreciate you being here today, but I strongly disagree with your views on the EPA's latest rules covering fossil fuel-fired plants. I believe it is important that this committee, as well as the House and Senate, continue to push back on the EPA's rules that will threaten reliability and lead to rolling blackouts, brownouts for our constituents. To that end, I will be introducing a CRA resolution with Senator Capito to disapprove of the Clean Power Plan 2.0. I urge my colleagues to support this effort and make it clear that we will not sit on the sidelines as the EPA wages war on the reliable baseload power that our constituents rely on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Representative Peters, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Administrator. Thank you for being here.
Morning.
San Diego, as you know, continues to endure one of the most significant environmental catastrophes in the Western Hemisphere, the flow of untreated sewage and toxic waste across the border from Mexico through the Tijuana River Valley watershed and into San Diego. Recently, a story from the San Diego Union Tribune illustrates the seriousness of this circumstance. The report highlights how a combination of increased sewer gas concentrations, obviously contaminated water, and higher temperatures exacerbates respiratory illnesses, headaches, and other health problems for my constituents and for the Navy SEALs that train in the water. The San Diego congressional delegation, in partnership with our senators and the Biden administration, and joined by the Republican members of this Congress, many whom served and trained in these waters themselves, have started to make some progress, and I want to thank you for your help. I also know you have personally made the trip to see and to smell this issue for yourself, because it is it's an experience you have to actually meet to understand. So I want to thank you for coming out. In the 2024 appropriations package, we secured a funding increase for the International Boundary Water Commission's construction account, along with language to provide additional flexibility for the commission to repair critical sewage treatment infrastructure at the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant, which is owned and operated by the United States government. Again, thank you for your attention to this crisis. Have you, has EPA and related stakeholders, have you identified potential funding sources for IBWC with this new authority? If so, can you provide a list of those agencies to my office? And what more is the EPA doing to work with IBWC on this particular issue?
Well, thank you for your leadership on this issue and for securing that $156 million in fiscal year 2024 for the South Bay Treatment Plant. I do remember seeing it firsthand and was very struck by it, and we have been committed to it ever since. IBWC plans to use the money from this appropriation to make repairs, and we're also in contact with them, and as the contracts come in, we're prepared to provide the remaining funding of $290 million for the expansion needed to safeguard these waters. This is absolutely a whole-of-government approach, and so this past January, EPA and IBWC finalized an interagency agreement to transfer the USMCA funds to the IBWC for treatment expansion projects. And so we are wisely using these funds. We are strengthening our partnerships. We're also using our international relationships to continue to hold Mexico accountable for this pollution as well. So all of the burden is not on the American taxpayers.
Thank you. I want to spend the rest of my time talking about methane, just to refresh people's memory. Methane is a short-lived climate pollutant that's much more dangerous in the short term than carbon dioxide, but it leaves the atmosphere much more quickly, and so the opportunity to get rid of methane is really the low-hanging fruit in dealing with climate change. And to the extent that that comes from the oil and gas industry, I've gone to Texas a number of times to suggest that that's something we could work on together. As natural gas is going to be continue to be used, we can make ours cleaner. I think that's very worthy, and I want to commend you for your leadership when it comes to methane. Analysis has shown that the final methane rule that you proposed will drive an 80% reduction in methane emissions from what otherwise would be in the air without the rule. Let's just talk for a minute about how we tackle the remaining 20%. First of all, have you engaged the smaller oil and gas producers so that they can take advantage of the methane emissions reduction program? We put money in there to help them comply because we know how tough it is for some of them to make ends meet. There's money in the bill that we passed to help those folks. How have you engaged with them to let them know that that's out there?
Well, we've engaged with them directly from day one on the rule, which I would say is technologically advanced and very innovative, that took into consideration the smaller producers. But Congress, EPA has partnered with DOE to provide over $1 billion in financial assistance for some of the smaller operations. So we are engaging directly to better understand what their needs are. Last December, we announced $350 million to 14 states, $22 million to California, to focus on super emitters and cutting emissions from wells and focusing on some of the smaller producers. So we're engaging directly. I mean, we're having direct conversations with these smaller emitters. We know what the needs are. We're thankful for the billions of dollars Congress has given us through the Inflation Reduction Act, and we're going to make sure that they get those resources.
Again, I've heard from my colleagues in Texas this is an issue. I think this money's available for compliance. And for the I'm going to have to ask you the last question if you'll respond in writing. I need an understanding of the number of abandoned or orphan wells are out there that are leaking that have to be closed, plugged, and what the amount of money that would be required to accomplish that task. We'll provide that question in writing and ask you to respond. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Representative Allen, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Carter, for holding this important hearing on the Environmental Protection Agency's fiscal year 2025 budget. I want to thank Administrator Regan for testifying in front of the subcommittee. Thank you for being here today. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Unfortunately, during the past 3 years, we've been we've seen some burdensome regulations coming out of the EPA that harm innovation, manufacturing, increase energy prices for Americans across the country. We've talked about those already. I have a lot to get through here, so I'm going to have to jump right in. Many of our farmers in my district are worried they soon may also not be able to use the crop protection products they rely on. Dicamba and acephate, two important pesticides for cotton growers especially, are currently at risk of disappearing. In the case of dicamba, a federal court ruling earlier this year vacated the current label. Bayer, a major dicamba testified manufacturer, has developed a new label, and I expect that other companies will follow suit. I want to encourage you to expedite these new labels through the process. In the case of acephate, not the courts, but your agency has begun the process of banning this pesticide. We can't expect our farmers to continue to operate if we strip them of the critical tools at this time. The yields that they are providing are unprecedented, and if we restrict those yields, we're going to run out of food, sir. I hope that the EPA understands how critical these pesticides are and will work with our farmers on this, and I would suggest that you get out there in the fields and talk with them about it and how we're using it in Georgia safely. Next, I'd like to move on to the Clean Power Plan 2.0 rule, which will essentially shut down reliable generation. The electric cooperatives in my district provide electricity in some of Georgia's lowest income and most disadvantaged communities, which is a hallmark of electric cooperatives across the United States that collectively serve 92% of the country's persistent poverty counties. Personally, I think ensuring energy affordability is one of the most important things I can work on in Congress, particularly for my rural constituents in the district. Administrator Regan, do you think it's fair to ask the rural energy consumers of the 12th District to foot the bill for the nicer carbon capture technology that is required in this rule?
Well, no, we're not asking the rural electric cooperatives to do that.
My understanding is that no carbon capture system required by the power plant rule has achieved the performance specifications demanded. Is that yes or no?
I answered that question inaccurately earlier. The answer is yes. Petronova in Texas has achieved that 90%.
Okay. Next, I'd like to talk about the particulate matter PM 2.5 rule that EPA finalized this year. I believe this rule is disastrous for manufacturing, especially in my home state of Georgia, which is consistently the top state to do business in. That is why I introduced the CAR rule for this. I'd like to clarify, you said your modeling says that 90% of counties will be in attainment under the new PM standards. Chair Carter's point is that 90% of counties will not have the room or headspace to permit new manufacturing. This is a problem. Georgia is also the #1 forestry state in the country, providing high-paying and stable jobs for many of my constituents. Controlling wildfire risks through prescribed burns is essential for the health of forests and safety of nearby communities. According to the Georgia Environmental Protection Division, from 2019 to 2021, there were 37 exceedances of the daily particulate matter standard attributable to exceptional events. 25 of those were because of prescribed burns. Unfortunately, exceptional event demonstrations have typically been restricted to events that spike PM 2.5 concentrations above 35 micrograms. I'm afraid that because of the lowered standards, with no changes to exceptional events threshold, land managers and states are being dissuaded from using prescribed burns to manage wildfire risk. Why did the EPA tighten the PM 2.5 standard without addressing the threshold for exceptional event demonstrations?
We absolutely addressed the exceptional events. We engaged with all of our forest managers across the country.
So you have
When you look at wildfires,
you have addressed those?
exceptional events, yes, that data that hits those monitors is not contributing to any kind of exceedances.
Continuing with the PM 2.5 and exceptional event demonstrations, I'm concerned that even when states can submit demonstrations, the agency is not addressing them in a timely manner. Is that true?
No, I think we are very responsive, and if there are some cases that you can point to, I would be glad to look into those.
Okay, we will do that. Last year, the GAO published a report showing the EPA is falling behind with a growing number of submissions being on hold or under review. The President's budget request does not address exceptional events and any of its air quality. Is processing exceptional events a priority for the EPA, given its crucial role in preventing areas from slipping into non-attainment?
It is.
Okay, well, I am out of time. Thank you, Mr. Administrator, and I yield back.
Thank you,
The
sir.
gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Representative Pfluger, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Regan, do you intend to place the Permian Basin into a status of non-attainment regarding ozone?
We're going to continue to work with both Texas and New Mexico to manage this process.
Are you aware that there are only 3 monitors in the entire Permian Basin, and do you know where those monitors are?
I'm sorry?
Are you aware that there's only 3 monitors, and do you know where those monitors are
I
located?
personally don't know where the monitors are, but my staff does.
They're in New Mexico. Do you know how big the Permian Basin is?
I have an idea, yes.
Have you been there?
I have not.
I want to commend Dr. Nance for coming. Do you make the decision on non-attainment?
I'm not quite sure.
Do you make the
Personally?
decision as the administrator of the EPA?
No. We
You don't?
We have a program that determines non-attainment.
Who makes that decision?
Our Office of Air and Radiation makes that decision.
Are you the principal advisor to the president on air quality?
I am.
So do you make the decision on non-attainment?
No, I don't personally make the decision on non-attainment. There's a program that evaluates
What I heard today was you visit a lot of communities that you're worried about, right?
I absolutely do, yes.
Are you worried about the Permian Basin?
That's why Dr. Nance was there last week.
But are you personally worried about it?
I am, but when I can't make everywhere, all 50 states, that's why RAs go and make these visits that she made with you last week.
Tell me how much methane intensity has been reduced in the Permian Basin in the last 10 to 15 years.
I could have staff answer those questions for you.
This is a really important area.
Sure.
It's the most important area for energy production in the entire world. Wouldn't you think you would know what the intensity decrease was over the last 10 to 15 years?
As the administrator of a very large agency, I don't walk around with those specific facts in my head.
Which is, that's
but
why
there are people that do.
That's
and
why
I can
we're
get
having
that
this hearing.
information for you.
Will you commit to coming to the Permian Basin before a final decision is reached?
I will commit that we'll have senior management come to the Permian Basin.
See, I think this is why we're having problems. Do you think the EPA should be authorized by Congress?
Do I think it should
Do you
be
think your
authorized?
organization should be authorized by
Well,
Congress?
I guess President Nixon in 1970 and Congress in 1970 thought that. So
Well, we'll ask those questions later. We're talking about the most important, secure supply of energy in the entire world. The economic impact, the amount of production, the low price, affordable, clean energy. 32+% is the reduction in methane intensity in the Permian Basin over the last 10 to 15 years. Yet, at the very same time, we've increased the production 5-fold, from 1 million barrels a day to 6 million barrels a day. I'm very disappointed that you don't know that, because that is exactly why we are concerned about the overreach of the EPA, not having those facts, saying you don't walk around with those facts. You have to walk around with those facts. We're talking about energy security for our entire country here. This is the area that you should come visit. Of all the areas, this is the area that you personally should come visit. Did you review the Subpart W final rule?
the last time you and I talked, you asked for me to send Dr. Nance, and now today, as a gotcha, you've
not-
never invited me before, and now you're inviting me. And
we haven't.
we supplied Dr. Nance to come see you. So
we haven't invited,
whenever you
and
make
I'm
an
glad
ask,
she came
I
and visited.
I try to oblige your ask whenever you make them.
But this is the most important energy production area in the entire world.
And you asked
And
Dr.
you,
Nance.
as the EPA director, should come visit it. Because if you're worried about methane intensity, you would know that we've reduced it by 32%.
I am absolutely
Did you
worried about it,
review?
and-
Did you review
and
the
I honored your
Subpart
request
W?
of Dr. Nance coming
We
to
appreciate
visit you.
it. Did you review the Subpart W rule personally yourself?
Of course, I was briefed on Subpart W rule.
Did you review the rule?
Of
yourself?
course, I was briefed on the Subpart
Do you know how many
W rule.
pages that rule is?
I don't count pages and rules.
We do.
I mean, you might
We
think
do.
that I have time to do that, but I don't have time to count pages and rules. That's such a ridiculous question.
I feel like you're getting very defensive in these questions.
No, I'm not defensive. I just like reasonable questions. And
Let me
counting
tell you how many
pages and rules.
I think you would know
Counting
because
pages and rules.
you know how many pages it is? It's 2,685 pages.
How many pages are in the electric
Administrator
vehicle-
Regan, I'm going to reclaim my
How many pages are in the
time.
clean cars rule?
I'm going to
I've got
reclaim.
lots of rules to count pages on.
Mr. Chairman, can we suspend? We'll reset that clock for a second. I'm not sure exactly how much time, but I'll wait until we get it back. Thank you, 2,685 pages. You earlier testified today that you have been engaging with small energy companies from day one. Is that true?
Yes.
Do you know how many companies your agency has actually engaged with from Mr. Goffman to my office? 8. 8 companies. I asked him the same question I'm going to ask you. Which small producers have you engaged with regarding methane, ozone, or any of the finalized Quad O, B, and C, any of the rules that are...
We will get you a complete list.
It was given to me. It was 8 companies, and not a single one of them were small independent producers.
We will get you a complete list.
These are not gotcha questions. This is to demonstrate the fact that I don't believe you personally have taken the time and interest in an area that is producing 43+% of our country's oil and gas production.
It is a gotcha question. Asking me to ask my regional administrator to visit you, and we do that.
And by the way,
and you
the
say
visit-
you're
the
not
visit was-
appreciative of that, and you say I haven't gone.
The visit was very much appreciated.
The gentleman's time has expired.
You are invited, and I would appreciate you getting back to me. 2,685 pages is way too much to understand anything about how to enforce these rules, how they're going to impact economically. I know my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I
The
appreciate the
gentleman
invitation.
yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Representative, I'm sorry, the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Representative Barragan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Regan, I want to thank you for your tireless work to strengthen our air and our water protections and invest in environmental justice communities. It was great to have you in my district last month to announce EPA's Clean Ports Program, which I was proud to secure funding for in the Inflation Reduction Act the Democrats fought to pass. And I'm sorry you have to deal with questions about pages and things of that nature, because if I sat here and asked a member of Congress how many pages one of their bills was, they probably wouldn't know the answer to it. Or if I asked the member of Congress the meetings they took 6 months ago and with whom and where, I would probably have to get back to my staff. So I apologize you have to get gotcha questions and instead focus on the work that you're doing for the American people, which is so critical. And one of those is EPA and lead in aircrafts that I want to ask you about. Last fall, the EPA issued an endangerment finding that lead emissions from aircraft are harmful to public health. The science is clear. There is no safe blood level of lead, and exposure to lead can have permanent detrimental health impacts in children. My constituents live near Long Beach Airport, suffer from this lead pollution, where planes emit almost 1,600 pounds of lead each year into neighborhoods. Now that the endangerment finding has been finalized, EPA is obligated to propose regulations for lead emissions from aircraft that use leaded fuel. Can you tell us where the EPA is in the process, and what are your next steps to address leaded aviation fuel?
Well, thank you for that question, and thank you for your leadership. Yes, because we have issued an endangerment finding, the Clean Air Act directs EPA to propose and promulgate standards. So our subsequent regulatory action will be done in concert with FAA. We're going to be working together to carefully consider the technology, the cost, the lead time, the safety. We are well on our way having those conversations, and we're working on regulatory options that address these potentially harmful emissions, and we're going to keep doing that in partnership.
Great. When a rulemaking process is launched, I would respectfully ask the EPA to hold a public hearing in Long Beach, California, so my constituents can have an opportunity to give public comment, and certainly would love that engagement. Great. Mr. Administrator, moving on to my next question. The Inflation Reduction Act included $3 billion for the Environmental and Climate Justice Grant Program. Based off of my bill, the Climate Justice Grants Act, how have the initial grants from this program benefited environmental justice communities, and is EPA on track to award the remaining $2 billion in community change grants by the end of this year?
Well, thank you for that, and yes, we are on track. As of last November, we launched our new Community Change Grants Program, which will invest $2 billion in activities that benefit disadvantaged communities. As you know, many of these communities have had solutions for decades. They just haven't had a seat at the table. This is a significant opportunity to do that. In December of 2023, we announced $600 million for 11 selected grant makers under the Environmental Justice Thriving Communities Grant Program. So we're ensuring that we're soliciting partnership with those who have been on the ground, who understand where these investments should go, and we're very confident that we're on track doing that.
Great, thank you. There are 8 adopted California climate and clean air rules waiting on federal waivers from EPA. These rules include zero emission standards for tugboats, locomotives, and trucks. I know you've heard me already ask you privately, so publicly, will EPA prioritize the review of these waivers?
We absolutely will. We've been working with CARB. There are 8 waivers. They are very ambitious waivers, and so we want to give the correct technical evaluation to them. So we've been having those conversations, and we've begun to prioritize those 8 waivers in response to how California is also advising the priority of those 8 waivers.
Great, thank you. If EPA were to approve all these waivers, nearly 9,000 lives could be saved, and California would see over $75 billion in public health benefits. This also has national implications since other states can opt into California standards. So I just urge EPA to make these waivers a priority. For my next and last question, for the President's proposed fiscal year 2025 budget, there is a significant requested increase for EPA's civil rights program, which enforces compliance with civil rights laws to address environmental injustice in communities. Can you provide greater detail on how EPA plans to use these additional funds to address environmental and public health disparities?
Absolutely. We are responding to an unprecedented volume of civil rights complaints filed with the agency. These resources will represent about a $20 million increase, and that will help us advance this very important work. It'll help us to not only give a close review of these complaints, but also engage with those who have filed these petitions in a timely manner and provide a level of transparency on that civil rights program. So that request is in, is sorely needed, and we look forward to the partnership and receiving those funds.
Great, thank you, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Representative Pence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Regan, for being here. As a little side note, at one time in my life, I was the Chief Deputy Commissioner of the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, so something you and I have a little bit of background in that. I've got a Richmond coal plant, Richmond, Indiana. I'm in the Indiana 6th District, and it's one of those plants that when it gets 2 degrees like it did in December, they turn it on, and when it gets real hot in the summer, they turn it on, but it doesn't run all the time. So I got a question about an aspect of some new recent regulations. Your current coal combustion residuals policy was overtly silent on beneficial reuse, but the new rule covertly, retroactively regulates it through the EPA's new position that the CCR cannot be beneficially used on site. Was this intentional? If not, can you correct that?
I'll take a look at the level of specificity on that. Obviously, our crew looked at the health disbenefits of some of that coal ash and how it was being stored and how it was being reused.
Sure. This one's nowhere near the waterway. This has been going on for over 100 years, still in the same containment. I wish you would do that, okay?
We'll take a look at that.
It's owned by the city of Richmond, 37,000 people. And we need it as base load until an alternative can be, and not just shut down before and wipe out base load when we need it most. Okay? So see, I'm taking a kinder, gentler approach to you, huh? Giving you a break. How's that sound? Last time we spoke, we talked about RINs, E-RINs. And while the EPA decided to remove E-RINs from their final RFS rule, they cannot be taken. They have not taken the idea off the table for future regulations. At a June 2023 hearing in front of this committee, Assistant Administrator Joe Goffman stated your agency would be leaving the door open for E-RINs. Has the EPA had any further internal discussions about the E-RIN program?
We're still in that evaluation mode. We got a lot of comments on that program, ranging from how it could be done in an efficient way to questioning the legal authority to do so. So we're taking our time and giving that careful deliberation.
So one of the things that you and I talked about the last time we met, having spent my life in distributing petroleum product and moving, buying, selling RINs, and seeing the effect that that had on some groups versus other groups, I'm very concerned that this is going to, while it may create credits for some, particularly in my manufacturing area, it may increase cost drastically. Would E-RINs be something that a manufacturing facility, if they weren't buying clean energy, would they have to get in that game?
Let me have my folks get back to you on that. You're laying out the conundrum that we're in. It's very complex. We don't want to have any unintended consequences. We want it to be fair and transparent. That's one of the reasons we put a pause on it, and we're doing this thorough evaluation of it.
Well, certainly, as you know, RINs intentionally or maybe not intentionally picked winners and losers and cost one segment a great deal of money to continue to operate. But the whole idea of E-RINs and using clean energy, it covers, as you just said, and I hope you focus on that, could cover a whole bunch more people than anybody intended, and could be a real moneymaker for Wall Street and the trading of those, as I saw with RINs in and of themselves became a very hot commodity, and in some cases were worth more than selling the petroleum was, right? And so would E-RINs become more valuable than clean energy on a market traded? So have you discussed that?
We're looking at all of those options. And again, that is one of the reasons we didn't move forward. There's a lot of things that need to be looked into, and I hope that our teams can continue to talk, because we want that input if and when we move forward with E-RINs.
Well, great. I hope you kind of find the right thing there. And see, wasn't this a better line of questioning than you have? And I'm a Republican. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Dr. Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Administrator Regan, thank you for joining us today and for your dedication to improving air quality, expanding clean water access, and promoting environmental conservation. These are three initiatives that greatly impact the people I represent. And I'm going to speak about them and ask you questions about them. First, in terms of air pollution, my district consistently gets F grades by the South Coast Air Quality Management District for their air quality. And we have the highest rates of asthma in the entire state of California. And in March 2024, the EPA announced a rule to strengthen air quality standards, lowering the particulate matter threshold from 12 to 9 micrograms per cubic meter. This adjustment will significantly reduce the harmful impacts of fine particulates in the air. Unfortunately, my Republican colleagues seek to impede the progress and undermine the agency's ability to protect the public's health. Can you speak to the projected public health benefits of the stronger standard and how it can help our communities, specifically our most vulnerable members?
Absolutely, and thank you for your leadership on this issue and for your advocacy for proper monitoring and programs for your district. The new standard will absolutely save lives and avoid illnesses, preventing up to 4,500 premature deaths and 290,000 lost workdays. We know that that number disproportionately impacts some segments of the population. And so we have designed a public health standard that we believe is most protective of those who are most vulnerable. But it also yields $46 billion in net health benefits by the year 2032. And the thing that's really impressive is for every dollar spent from this action, there could be as much as $77 in human health benefits through the duration of this rule. So it is focused on public health for everyone, but especially those who have been disproportionately impacted.
Thank you. Secondly, over the past decade, my district has consistently been categorized by the EPA as a non-attainment due to unhealthy air quality exceeding the 2012 standard of 12 micrograms per cubic meters. Could you highlight the tools that the EPA is using to help underserved rural and minority communities like mine reduce their pollution levels and come into attainment?
Well, absolutely. Number one is we are trying to up our game in the monitoring of these areas to be sure that we have our finger on the pulse, which I believe we do. And secondly, there are a lot of technical assistance grants and opportunities that we're deploying at the local level so that we can see local innovation and creativity match with state and federal obligations. When you look at what can be done at a local level in a unique way, but also if you add some of the federal regulations that we are doing to rein in tailpipe emissions, to look at fugitive emissions and others, we believe that cumulatively that will help those communities.
Okay. And thirdly, the residents in my district have struggled with getting access to clean water. For years, I've collaborated closely with the EPA to improve the water supply at the Oasis Mobile Home Park, where residents face toxic high arsenic levels in their water supply. And since at least 2019, the Oasis Mobile Home Park has faced recurring water issues. The EPA has issued emergency orders that year due to arsenic levels in the water system being up to 9 times the maximum containment level, with 2 more orders following since then. Could you highlight the steps the EPA is taking to address arsenic in underserved communities like Oasis?
Well, absolutely, and no community should have to face what Oasis is facing, and so we've been taking action. As you know, EPA and DOJ filed a complaint against these operators. We're hoping for an anticipated trial date as early as, I believe, next year. But we have assumed direct oversight of 20 water systems since 2020. And as of January, 6 have returned to compliance because of EPA's action. We're going to continue to focus on those 14 that are left. But rest assured, the Department of Justice and EPA plan to hold Oasis accountable for this travesty and ensure that we try to make that community as whole as possible.
I hope so. A 17-year-old young man died of renal cancer, which is a possibility of arsenic consumption, chronic high loads of arsenic consumption. He had no other risk factors from Oasis Mobile Home Park. Lastly, the Colorado River Basin, which supplies water to over 40 million people in major U.S. cities, is experiencing its driest period in over 1,000 years. Thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law, the administration was able to allocate $15.4 billion for Western water resources to bolster drought resilience. Could you highlight how EPA funds such as these will properly allocate and distribute to advance the conservation efforts in the region?
Well, absolutely. First, we're working closely with the White House, Reclamation, and other agencies to be sure that we're leveraging every single dollar. We have highlighted drought resilience eligibilities and priorities in the implementation of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And in particular, our Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund has delivered more than $2.5 billion to the basin states for drought resilience and other critical water infrastructure. So we've not only prioritized it in terms of EPA's goals, but also ensuring that from an interagency standpoint, we're doing the same thing.
Thank you. Yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Iowa, Dr. Miller Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Administrator Regan, for testifying before the committee. I actually have a lot of questions for you today, so I'd appreciate if you can keep your responses brief. However, it bears repeating, and I've said this numerous times in this hearing when we're talking about health benefits, health consequences, that 5 million people die globally every year due to exposure to excessive hot or cold. The vast majority of those, 8%, die from cold, 8 times more than from heat, 4.5 million annually. 2019 study from the National Bureau of Economic Research estimates that by driving down natural gas prices due to the fracking revolution has saved more than 11,000 American deaths in winter per year from 2005 to 2011. Not hypothesis, actual deaths, and death, I would say, is a severe health consequence. The draft proposals put forward by the EPA to allow electric vehicle manufacturers to participate in generating renewable fuel standard credits were unprecedented and highly concerning if finalized. And I know you addressed this with Representative Pence, but I think it bears repeating because Iowa has some of the highest production of biofuels, be it ethanol, biodiesel, or compressed renewable natural gas. We also know that if in the United States we aren't producing those things, they will be produced elsewhere at much more significant environmental consequences. The RFS was not meant for electricity generation from an electric vehicle, even if that electric vehicle is charged using biogas that creates electricity. And Minister Regan, can you commit that the EPA will not move forward with a rule to allow electric vehicle manufacturers to qualify for RIN credits under the RFS?
We are, again, we're taking a very close look at that. One of the things that I'm most proud of is the RVOs that we put in motion. We have taken great pride and strides there, and so we are evaluating.
I would love to have a commitment from you. I'm going to move on.
Okay.
I'd like to revisit a question that you didn't have the answer to last year when I asked, and I'm going to ask it again. I don't consider these gotcha questions.
Sure.
And perhaps it's what I expect of myself as a standard, both in Congress and as a physician and as a military veteran. Are you aware how many passenger vehicles are on the road in the U.S. today?
I am not.
279 million. And are you aware how much energy it takes to get a single 100-mile charge on an electric vehicle? These are passenger vehicles.
Sure, I don't have that.
30 kilowatt hours. Now, the reason I ask that question, if you're going to make a rule that has such consequential impact to people's personal lives, to their health, to their ability to visit family, to the ability of our economy to work in the United States, I would expect of myself to know, because 279 million vehicles and 30 kilowatt hours comports to approximately 9 trillion kilowatt hours needed for energy for electric vehicles on the road today. And this is at a time when the EPA is trying to force closures of coal plants under the Clean Power 2.0 rule and has plans to go after natural gas plants next. And the EPA's plan to meet the electricity demand for the remaining, requiring 69% of cars to be electric by 2032. My point is, before issuing a rule, you would need to know an assessment of what it is and a plan for how to generate that electricity. And there's no such, I think, illustration that the EPA has even taken any of that into consideration.
We have. I can guarantee you we have, and our staffs can connect on the type of thorough analysis we've done on the demand that would be required and the reliability factors that we've used there.
Well, somehow it's missing to most of Congress and most Americans who want to have choice in their vehicles. Do you also need a reminder on the disaster this past January of electric vehicles and charging stations in Chicago not holding a charge during sub-zero temperatures? It does kind of get cold up north. Does the EPA not believe that consumer choice is important when selecting a vehicle that reliably fits their needs every day of the year, regardless of weather?
Absolutely, which is why we didn't issue a mandate. If you take a look at that, there's internal combustion engines, plug-in hybrids, and electric vehicles. There's a combination of options for the American people.
I think the American people would very much like to see the rationale behind the rule. And Minister Regan, are you aware that the U.S. manufactured goods are 80% more carbon efficient than the world average?
Yes.
If the particulate matter 2.5 level has been found safe by the EPA at 12 micrograms per cubic meter since 2012 for the last 14 years, what alarming new research has come to rationalize why the EPA would rush to drastically lower the approved amount by 3 points outside of the regulatory statutory process?
We're still seeing premature deaths. We're still seeing lost work days. We're still seeing the disbenefits from a health standpoint of on the economy. And so that lowering of the standard is more protective, especially for those who are disproportionately impacted by these pollutants.
Yeah, I think the effect on the economy will be drastic, as will the effect on health, by not having affordable energy and not having an economy that can grow and compete internationally. Thank you. With that, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. The EPA published its coal combustion residual rule on coal ash disposal and on expanding jurisdiction to all CCR ponds with a standard that only allows for closure. Isn't that correct?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, sir?
EPA published its coal combustion residual, CCR, rule on coal ash disposal and expanding jurisdiction to all CCR ponds with a standard that really only allows for closure. Isn't that correct?
No, I think that there are opportunities where you could have the proper monitoring in place and the proof that there is no contact with groundwater that would allow for a remedy.
All right. In 2015, the same EPA regulated coal ash under Subtitle D of the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, implying that ash is solid waste, not hazardous waste. In 2015 regulation, the EPA specifically mentions how coal ash has beneficial uses and is not, I repeat, this was from the EPA, is not classified as hazardous waste. So why would you restrict other uses in the 2024 rule by only requiring closures or this system where you have it completely shut off from any contact with water?
Well, I think we have the science that proves, like in my home state of North Carolina, where this coal ash was not properly disposed of. We've seen the contact, we've seen the consequences to groundwater and drinking water. So the science proves that when you have the leaching of this coal ash into drinking water, groundwater, that it definitely impacts public health, and especially those neighborhoods and communities that are in close contact to these coal ash facilities.
Do you anticipate any enforcement actions against coal ash users who buy coal ash from CCR impoundments?
The regulation is focused on the proper storage of coal ash. And so this is focused on if the facility that has been responsible for generating the ash is not properly disposing of it, then that is where EPA's focus is.
So I guess I'm trying to figure out, have you decided now it is a hazardous waste?
We know that coal ash is hazardous. We know that from just looking at the health disbenefits of it, and the rule gives the proper prescription for how to dispose of it.
So here's the concern I have. The rules changed from 2015 to 2024. If it is considered hazardous, then does everyone who has a product like a cinder block building that was built out of cinder blocks that used coal ash, do they need to be worried about liability or abatement because they come into contact with water?
No.
Abatement or worry about
that product
having to remove it like you do with asbestos?
No, that product has gone through a process that has stripped or removed most of the toxics or potentially all of the toxics from it. So those byproducts are not what we're regulating. We're regulating that raw ash that has been improperly stored for a number of years.
You know, one of my concerns is that that's what the EPA says today, but in 2015, it wasn't even considered hazardous. Now it's considered hazardous, and what will it be in 2033?
Hazardous.
It'll be hazardous, but what about those people with the cinder blocks? I'm just saying, I think the rule, if I had a cinder block building, and I do, I might be worried about that. Do you all intend for companies to have to amend their closure plans for existing units which were required to be developed years ago in order to meet the new rule?
I'll have to get back to the specifics. It depends on the facility and what they're currently doing to monitor, and if there is no groundwater contact or if there's adequate monitoring, then I'm sure there's a plan for it.
If they've already developed a plan years ago, you're saying they could be required to shut down under the new rule and have to come up with a different plan?
Not necessarily shut down, but they'll have to take a look at the existing plan to see if it meets the new requirements to ensure that there is little to no groundwater contact or that they are monitoring the contact that's occurring.
Let me ask you this. If there's a pond out there that's been closed for years, doesn't meet the new rule requirements, and there's been no problem and the EPA doesn't find any problem, why would you require the utility to uncap, dig up, and then send numerous dump trucks through what is likely a small community for weeks, if not months and years, in order to move the product that you say is hazardous from a facility where apparently it's been stored for years safely?
I'm not sure you'd have to do that. That scenario you just laid out, we'd have to look at the
But if it comes
pond.
in contact with some water but hasn't been a problem, I think you,
We may not know if it's been a problem unless it's been properly monitoring, which is why monitoring is a key in this conversation.
all right. I yield back. My time is up.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Representative James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Regan. I appreciate you making yourself available today for a frank discussion on EPA's policies, and for the sake of time, I'll just jump into my questions. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, Michigan employs approximately 165,000 workers in automotive manufacturing, many of which are union employees. Because electric vehicle assembly requires fewer employees than combustion engines and eliminates the need for 3/4 of the current vehicle workforce, estimates project that Michigan will suffer almost a 117,000 job loss if 67% of new vehicle sales are electric. This comply or die EV agenda will put 77,000 manufacturing jobs in Michigan 10th Congressional District alone in jeopardy and great risk of extinction. Are you concerned about the impact that these regulations are going to have on Michiganders who currently rely on these jobs?
I've had a significant number of conversations with President Shawn Fain about this very issue. And I think we have a plan in place to protect these workers, which is why the UAW, the Big Three, the Automobile Alliance, all gave positive statements when this rule was issued on the day that we made the announcement.
And just for the benefit of Congress here, can you share a little bit about what that plan is? You said you had a plan with the UAW.
The transition to workers?
Yes.
Yes, to retool workforce development. Yes, we can provide you the details that were provided to us by the experts, by the UAW, by labor, by others, again, who have said that we need to do this in an appropriate way.
And in the plan, was there any money associated with this plan and retooling and retraining, anything that was released recently?
There are resources coming from the administration at large, not coming from our regulation.
Okay, so last week it was about $100 million. Are you aware of what penalties Stellantis and General Motors paid based upon their non-compliance with already unrealistic regulations thus far for the automotive model years 2018 and 19?
GM and Stellantis supported this rule. I mean,
because they're afraid of getting crushed by overburdensome regulation coming from the government. It was over $300 million. And so the $100 million that is being proposed to help with this retooling, retraining, pales in comparison to the over $300 million that's already been taken away from automotive manufacturers. What happens, bless you, what happens is the bonuses of these UAW workers are reduced further when they're paying penalties that do not go into retraining or retooling. It goes into the general fund and does not benefit either reducing climate emissions or retraining workers. My next question, automakers are losing roughly $6,000 on every EV they sell at a price point of $50,000. There are even instances of American automakers, job creators based in Michigan, reporting losses of more than $100,000 for every EV it delivered in the first quarter of this year. Consumers are paying more because of this mandate, and American automakers are losing money. Administrator Regan, wealthy people receiving tax credits to subsidize an EV market that is being offset by increasing prices on combustion engine vehicles is not sound policy. When you also consider that the heavier vehicles are destroying our roads, barriers are no longer capable of stopping this amount of force, putting people in jeopardy of increasing fatalities due to crashes, which are already high. You look at parking structures collapsing, a grid that's not ready, technology that's still being developed. Why does the EPA support raising costs and reducing consumer choice for average Americans, particularly when infrastructure trust funds are relying on gas taxes? Have those been considered?
Yes, all of what you've laid out has been considered and discussed. I wouldn't say we've come to the same conclusion, and I won't speak for the auto workers in the UAW. I'll let them speak for themselves. They supported the rule. I won't speak for GM and Stellantis and others who are running $7 million Super Bowl ads either. The future is electric, but our rule isn't an EV mandate. It provides lots of combinations of options.
So your rule isn't a mandate?
It's not a mandate, no.
Okay.
If you look at the compliance options that they have, which, by the way, Toyota and others weighed in heavily, we increased the number of hybrids, plug-in hybrids. There are internal combustion engines that are qualifying as well. When you look at the options that they have to pursue this rule. I
So
personally don't
I get your
believe-
intent, but
personally
I've heard
don't
enough. I
believe the
get your intent, but intent is not impact, is what I see, is whatever you intend with these rules, the impact will be is that the uptake is only 7%, and inside the span of the next 5 to 10 years, expecting this will absolutely crater American jobs. It's going to hurt people in Michigan's 10th Congressional District, and it's not going to achieve the goals that you say are going to be achieved. With that, I have to yield the rest of my time.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Representative Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank our ranking member, and I want to thank you, Administrator, for being here testifying before us today. As you know, the transportation sector accounts for 27% of greenhouse gas emissions, more than any other sector in the United States, and is the fastest growing sector emitting greenhouse gas emissions. Last year, I sent you a letter along with Congresswoman Matsui and Senators Markey and Padilla, urging the EPA to expeditiously finalize strong Phase 3 greenhouse gas emission standards for model year 2027 through 2032 heavy-duty vehicles. And while EPA ultimately did not choose to finalize the most stringent alternative, I want to commend EPA for finalizing a robust rule that protects public health, sets performance-based standards as required by the Clean Air Act, and accelerates our transition to cleaner, greener transportation technologies. Administrator Regan, can you please describe the public health benefits and cost savings that the American people can expect to see thanks to this rule?
Well, thank you for your leadership on this issue, and the final standard will provide $13 billion in annual benefits, health benefits to society, especially for the folks who are 72 million, to be exact, who are living in close proximity to these roads. And not to mention that we expect truck and bus owners to see approximately $3.5 billion in savings. We believe that this is a win-win-win. It's a win for the truckers, it's a win for the economy, it's a win for public health. And there's one more win, and that's for the environment.
Very well. And despite the immense cost savings and public health benefits, my Republican colleagues are baselessly attacking this rule, keeping in line with their polluters over people agenda and going as far as to introduce Congressional Review Act resolution to overturn the rule and prevent the EPA from taking substantively similar action in the future. I strongly oppose this short-sighted effort to overturn this critical regulation. Arguments that this rule is part of some radical green agenda are misguided and, frankly, ridiculous. These achievable performance-based standards are finalized after an extensive stakeholder engagement process, which include industry. Administrator Regan, how did you address industry concerns with the proposal in the final rule?
Well, we took a lot of comments, and we took it to heart. We looked at what we perceived to be the available technologies. You mentioned that we did not choose the most stringent, and we proposed a number of options. We looked at the cost benefit, the technology available, and the reductions, and we landed with a very stringent final rule that the industry indicated from a technological standpoint, a feasibility standpoint, could be accomplished. That is going to save a tremendous number of lives. It's going to be cost effective. It's going to reduce cost on maintenance. And so, you know, I never pretend to represent others like some do, but when you look at the manufacturers that stood with us when we announced these rules, when you look at some of the comments out there from labor, I believe that we've threaded a needle that is protective of public health and the environment.
Very well. This final rule is proof that the EPA can prioritize protecting public health and the environment while providing regulatory flexibility and achievable compliance pathways for regulated parties. Strong regulations drive innovation, and I'm confident that this achievable final rule will do just that. Administrator Regan, it is my understanding that this regulation completes the EPA's Clean Trucks Plan. And now that the rule has been finalized, what other actions is EPA taking to promote clean, heavy-duty transportation?
Well, there are a number, and thank you for asking that question. It's because of your vote and others in terms of the resources we have from the Inflation Reduction Act that will give us a lot of financial incentives to continue to clean up heavy-duty vehicles, to clean up our ports, We've got a $2 billion announcement for community change grant programs. There are a lot of local solutions that these grant programs will reach that will help tailor the types of reductions and activities required. And so we're really excited to see some of the innovation and entrepreneurship of some of our local communities as they tackle some of these freight issues.
Absolutely. Strong regulations supported by historic federal investment are putting us on a path to greener, cleaner future that benefits all Americans. I thank the administrator for being here today and for his tireless work on reducing harmful pollution from the heavy-duty transportation sector. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
The gentlelady yields. The chair recognizes a gentleman from Michigan, Representative Wahlberg, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to make a statement for the record that we do not want pollution. May I say that again? As a Republican, conservative, and a vice chairman of the Conservative Climate Caucus, I do not want pollution. That's waste. It's waste of human lives, it's waste of energy, it's waste of all sorts of things. So this polluters over people mantra, because we don't have the ability to speak about truth in the way we ought to, is disgusting. But thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Administrator, for being here. I come from the auto state of Michigan, so I'll carry on with my colleague John James further on this EV standard, the final rule, and all that goes with it. We have a long history in Michigan with the auto industry. We are the auto state, the auto capital. We're proud of that fact. I'll never forget, as a freshly minted freshman member of Congress sitting next to the dean of our delegation, dean of the House, former chairman of this august committee, John Dingell, respected highly, talking with one of the titans of the auto industry about the CAFE standard back then, and giving him information on it, and then the titan of the auto industry said to him respectfully, Mr. Chairman, give us a reasonable standard and get out of the way. Because between our research, our engineers, and our customers, we'll make it happen. Don't tell us how to make it happen. This standard, this tailpipe standard, tells us how to do it. And while we can say it's not a mandate in verbiage, yet there is no vehicle that has a tailpipe that could meet the standard. You know it and I know it. And it's going to hurt the auto industry, it's going to hurt the consumer, and it's going to crush the taxpayer, especially lower income taxpayers. Auto companies like Ford halted production of their EV like the Ford F-150 Lightning. A hot rod of a truck, but it doesn't do the job, and it costs too much. Tesla laid off more than 10% of its global workforce due to failing sales. Administrator Regan, is EPA considering the tailpipe emissions rule EV sales projections, seeing as countless American families are rejecting the EVs?
We took a very strong look at what the market demand was, and we consulted very closely with the industry, and I think—
They're wusses. They're unwilling to push back against you. They're afraid of what else would come. Did I say that too strongly? I'd like to see people like that titan of industry, rest his soul, he no longer lives, to stand up and say, listen, we're delighted to do what you want us to do, but get out of our way. Give us that basic standard that's reasonable and rational, and we'll get her done.
And we had a lot of those tough conversations. I think you might have seen the proposal was much more stringent and maybe too prescriptive. What we finalized was basically a recommendation by the industry that says, listen, we know how to meet some of these emission reduction goals. We don't want to meet it necessarily with the percentages and combinations that you propose. So let us propose how we can meet those emission reductions. And I think that's why you see a much heavier penetration of plug-in hybrids and hybrids, a lot more—
But only 13%, as I understand it, will make up this deal.
Well, we can exchange information about those percentages because I think you really have to look at the combinations. Number one is the penetration of the product and how many of those products are on the market and what offsets what we had predicted or modeled would come from EVs will no longer come from
What
EVs.
impact will this have on low-income families?
Well, we think that low-income families will be competitive for vehicles that have less maintenance. There are lots of incentives to
They've got to buy it first.
to produce a lot more affordable vehicles. I've taken a look personally at the affordable vehicles that are on the market. There's diversification coming from these auto industries. And so, yes, we believe we're not going to leave these communities behind.
This rule, I believe, will inevitably increase costs for American taxpayers. The EPA, I believe, has tried to hide the bill. The Congressional Budget Office initially estimated that EPA tailpipe emissions rule would add $224 billion to the national deficit. EPA has tried to conceal the program's real costs from Congress and the American people. EPA's analysis estimated lower costs by utilizing faulty assumptions. For example, they assumed that without the rule, battery electric vehicle sales reached 39% of vehicle market in 2030. Is it true that the light-duty vehicles rules cost-benefit analysis does not account for the first 39% of battery electric vehicles sold?
I'm not quite sure about that calculation. I will say that the rule does account for the battery manufacturing uptick that we're seeing here domestically, and has taken into account, again, some of the product readiness that the companies have directly discussed with us. That's for battery, but that's also for plug-in hybrids and traditional hybrid and internal combustion as well.
Well, I tell you what, this administration probably won't have the opportunity to see the ultimate impact. We'll be gone before that impact is there. But it'll be tragic for the auto industry, but more importantly for the consumer. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Representative Castor, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Reagan, thank you for your devotion to hardworking American families. You recently said that one of the biggest challenges facing our nation is man-made pollution that damages our air, our water, our land. Not only is this pollution a major threat to public health, but it's pushing our planet to the brink. I agree. Pollution and the resulting climate crisis they're driving up the cost of living for all Americans. Back home in Florida, you know, skyrocketing electric bills because of gas price spikes. We have to run our air conditioners longer because there are too many hot days, well over 90 degrees. We have a property insurance crisis in Florida. All of this is really hitting my neighbors, really hitting them hard. That's why it was so important to see EPA tackle harmful climate pollution from power plants. Last year, I led a letter to you from about 100 of my Democratic colleagues that urged EPA to finalize the strongest possible carbon pollution standards for power plants, and at the same time encouraged the engagement with workers and unions and frontline communities. So I want to say thank you for delivering. Last month with the agency's historic rules to cut pollution from existing coal and new gas plants, as we do all that we can to help lower the cost and deliver cleaner, cheaper energy and a more resilient electric system all across the country. Administrator, my Republican colleagues continue to ignore the cost of the overheating climate. And they assert that clean energy is at odds with grid reliability. They'd have us believe that we need to burn more coal and rely on dirty energy sources to keep the lights on, just as we started in the 1800s. What is EPA's policy on new innovations like energy storage and solar that can help the U.S. deliver cleaner, cheaper energy to power communities when it's needed?
We encourage it, and we believe that we've designed flexible regulations that encourage innovation, whether it be looking at how we control methane, using satellite data, robotic dogs. We're using the most technologically advanced equipment to detect these leaks and reduce the pollution. when we look at innovative technologies like carbon capture and storage. We believe that it's within reach, and many are using it. Some are using it right here, right now, today. The idea is for the agency to be agnostic, to be technology neutral, but to promote the latest and greatest technology that provides the best public health benefits and environmental protection to this country. And that's what we've done through our congressionally mandated authority.
And it's pretty remarkable, over time, we're not importing energy as much as we used to. And the same goes for electric vehicles. It's been kind of hard to listen to some of the criticisms. We want to build the electric vehicles in America with American workers and American component parts, and that's what the Inflation Reduction Act was all about, empowering our communities. And so many of my Republican colleagues, their communities are benefiting from these huge investments in whether it's the battery plants or the EV plants, and the future is bright. It's not without stops and starts and challenges like anything, but I think it's an exciting future. And the same goes for the recent announcement on Solar for All. You know, when the Democratic-led Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, we intended to help put money back into the pockets of our neighbors back home through cleaner, cheaper energy. And I already mentioned the high electric bills back home in the so-called Sunshine State, largely because the regulators there and the politicians have kept us hooked on gas. Meanwhile, we have abundant free resources from the sun. So thank you very much for following through on what we intended through Solar for All. What do you say to communities that want to tap these resources? How do they find out about them?
Well, you know, they can go to EPA.gov, and we've got it prioritized on our website. Solar for All is such an awesome program, $7 billion. It's going to help over 900,000 families access cleaner, more affordable energy. As you know, that this program is targeted towards low-income families, and we project that it'll save low-income Americans $350 million annually. This is $350 million going back into the pockets of people that need it the most without pollution. And so, listen, I think that to the point you just made, domestic manufacturing of batteries and solar panels and high-tech vehicles, we can own the future. We will own the future. We want them to be American jobs, designed here through American ingenuity, and not be reliant on China. There's a global competition out here, and quite frankly, this administration and some of these regulations are putting us in a position to be globally competitive and globally superior.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Representative Crenshaw, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Regan, for being here. We'll talk about at the 30,000-foot level about the EPA. So according to the EPA's website, the core function of the EPA is to protect human health and the environment. And that's important because the word health, it's not just health incidents related to pollution. Your health is affected by your ability to work, buy electricity, transport yourself in your gasoline or electric-powered car, or utilize the latest medical technology created from advanced polymers made from fossil fuels. So balance is always the key. If you see your role as only protecting the environment without serious regard for human flourishing, then the logical conclusion would be ceasing all modern processes in manufacturing and just going pre-industrial. Now, no serious person actually says they want that, of course, I get that. But actions speak louder than words, and under your leadership, the EPA, in my opinion, has become the most dangerous agency in America. Now, why do I use the word dangerous? Because it's the only agency actively targeting and attempting to reverse the economic activity that creates human flourishing. We're more focused on appeasing the more radical environmentalist activists than creating pragmatic regulations that draw this essential balance between protecting the environment and protecting human flourishing. We're in an era of increasing demand for energy. Gasoline prices are up 52% since Biden took office. The price of electricity has increased 30%. And yet, your EPA's regulations are likely to risk the retirement of more than 155,000 megawatts of dispatchable energy. That's according to industry experts. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation has explicitly cited EPA regulations as a threat to grid reliability. Grid reliability is a big part of human flourishing. At the same time, in the midst of all this, over the past 50 years, air pollution has dropped nearly 80%. Our CO2 emissions have dropped to 1990 levels. It's not like we haven't been doing anything. It's not like we don't care. So we have an increasing demand for the most basic of modern necessities and an increasingly cleaner environment, and yet the EPA continues to adopt this perplexing mindset that if one regulation was good, then 10 more must be better. It doesn't have to be this way. We could lower emissions by focusing on innovation in carbon capture, nuclear energy. We could export more natural gas to countries that primarily burn dirty coal. We could acknowledge the shocking fact that CO2 emissions are in fact global and primarily come from China. Rules and regulations should be seriously considering the costs and benefits, not just blindly following the demands of some radical fools that glue themselves to museum art. Ironically, most likely using glue made from petroleum-based resins. I want to get to a couple questions, specifically on chemicals. The Toxic Substances Control Act. There are nearly 400 pre-manufacturing applications still awaiting a risk determination. Over 90% of those have passed the statutory deadline of 90 days. Can you comment on that and why that's taking so long?
The budget was cut this year specifically for that program. We received budget increases
But this backlog, this backlog predates this year's budget cuts. Which
predates me.
Just appropriate.
It predates this administration. We fought hard, and I think we did have in all honesty, we had a great, productive conversation about this. We made some headway. You all gave us more resources. We more than doubled the reviews each month with that increase, and now this year, we're seeing a reduction.
Understood resources could be an issue, but are they using the best science? I mean, are they really using the best, most logical science when it comes to assessing each application?
We are. As a matter of fact, we are incentivized to get as many new products on the market as possible. The courts have been hampering us for years. We haven't had the resources. We finally got the resources from you guys. We've been using the best science, putting more products on the market.
Okay.
And now the
I
funding
believe
is
you
being
that the
cut.
courts try to hamper you. I understand that the courts are often weaponized by outside groups. But look, here's one of my concerns. It's hard to explain a draft risk evaluation for formaldehyde that sets the safe limit at 11 parts per billion, which is actually below the level found in ambient air. There's another one that claims that the safe level of ethylene oxide should be lower than what it is naturally found in the human body. When I ask about the good science, that's where it's coming from, and I think that's worth looking into. Natural gas, this isn't your area. The Department of Energy has stopped our natural gas exports. But last time you were here, you acknowledged, and I think thoughtfully, that if we were to export more natural gas to dirty coal-burning countries, it'd be better for the environment, right? So at least from the environmental perspective, do you still agree with that?
I think that, according to my understanding, DOE has put a pause on that to get a better handle around science. But I, in no way, am reading that as a permanent pause on LNG or natural gas. We know that
that's
natural
comforting
gas is
because you know more about the administration's policies than I do. So if you think that that's coming back, boy, that is comforting. And again, I just want to get on the record that from the environmental standpoint, sending more natural gas to countries that primarily burn coal is overall better for global emissions, right?
Cleaner burning natural gas is absolutely better than coal.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Representative Cardenas, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Administrator Regan, for being with us today to answer our questions in full view of the public about what we're doing and not doing and what you're doing out there. As you are aware, every day over 20 million children across the country use a school bus to get to school. Unfortunately, these buses are often fueled by diesel, which pollutes the air our children breathe and leads to high rates of respiratory illnesses, health complications, and missed days of school. Simply put, this is an injustice to our youth and to our communities. In 2021, I worked with Congresswoman Hayes and Senators Padilla and Warnock to introduce the Clean Commute for Kids Act, the bill which addresses harmful diesel pollution that impacts our children. School teachers and communities went on to serve as the inspiration for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Clean School Bus Program. I'd like to thank you, Administrator, for your work and the work of your team at the EPA on the implementation of this vital program. The response from school districts has been nothing short of tremendous, and to date, every funding opportunity made available under the Clean School Bus Program has been oversubscribed. Throughout the rollout of the program, the applicant pool has included submissions from all 50 states, Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and federally recognized tribes. And in fact, it's my understanding that many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, their districts have submitted for this program extensively as well, and represent school districts and applied for funding through this program to buy cleaner school buses throughout America. Administrator Regan, can you provide an update on how we've seen communities and school districts respond to the Clean School Bus Program in both blue and red districts?
Well, it's just been, thank you for your leadership on this topic. This is one of the most enjoyable programs I've ever managed. Getting some of these dirty school buses off the roads and seeing some of these electric buses, these natural gas buses, replace that dirty diesel has just been great. Not just for us to see as staff, but watching the celebration of school superintendents, principals, teachers, bus drivers, and children all over the country, as you said, in red and blue districts.
Yes, thank you. And one of the school bus drivers in Los Angeles told me that one of the children enlightened him that the child said, "I can hear the person next to me when I'm talking to them." Just think about that, the peace and quiet, and also the ability for them to go to and from school without being harmed. So it would be safe to say that school districts in both Republican and Democratic districts are showing that they are they are ready and want to replace diesel buses with cleaner vehicles.
Absolutely. Whether it's in your district or Alma, Kansas, population less than 5,000, we're seeing applications that far exceed the amount of resources that we have.
Thank you. It's clear that a clean ride to school for our kids is widely beneficial, popular, and should not be a partisan issue. That's why this Congress, I've continued to work with my colleagues to ensure that this program has the resources it needs to continue to replace dirty school buses throughout the country. I'm thrilled to be joined by 140 of my House and Senate colleagues in writing to the leaders of the House and the Senate Appropriations Committees to build off of the down payment made in the IIJA and request an additional $300 million for the Clean School Bus Program for the fiscal year 2025. Administrator Regan, if appropriated, could additional funding for the Clean School Bus Program help meet the immense demand from school districts and tackle the monumental task of cleaning up the nation's school bus fleet?
Absolutely. As you said earlier, we're overprescribed every year. The bus manufacturing base here in the United States is prepped and ready and meeting that demand. It's good for jobs, it's good for the environment, it's good for our kids.
Good. And I think we're demonstrating to the rest of the world that we can clean up our act and that they can follow suit as well. I understand that you recently committed to Senator Padilla in a Senate committee hearing that you'll be visiting Southern California hopefully soon in the near term?
Absolutely.
Good. Yes, we have some unique and pressing air quality issues that him and many of the Southern California delegation would like to have you see for yourself. Hopefully we can see you out there soon. Having clarified that question, I can now go back to my apartment tonight and tell my roommate, Senator Padilla, that I did my job today. So thank you very much, and thank you for your leadership. And also, please go back and tell your team how much we appreciate them and how much we do appreciate the amazing work that they've done, unprecedented work that this country is now embarking on. So thank you so much. My time having expired, I yield back.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Representative Curtis, finally, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Administrator. The last time you and I talked and we met in this setting, we discussed how the EPA's lack of adherence to statutory deadlines was directly impacting the pace of American innovation. And by the way, much of that innovation is targeted at a cleaner environment, and by not approving these, we're using older methods that are not as effective. At the time, you told me that everything would be better if you could get more staffing and funding. I pushed back. This is not always an issue of money. It's an issue of organization, and it's an issue of will. But I will say in the last 8 years, EPA has administratively raised user fees more than 14-fold, and you just recently doubled it. Since today's a budget hearing, I want to spend a little time on your budget and starting with our conversation from last year. EPA's new chemicals program applications have dropped from 600 annually to just over 200. In the last 2 calendar years, without regard for a deadline that is a legal deadline, EPA made 95 and 101 determinations respectively. Bluntly put, I think we could still agree that's an F rating. You're required by law to return fees if you miss deadlines. However, EPA has never returned the fee to an applicant when EPA misses its deadline because the applicant always, coincidentally, suspends or withdraws their application. Can you explain why applications always withdraw or suspend their application just in time to allow EPA to keep their money for nothing in return?
I was unaware that applications were being withdrawn by force from EPA, so we'd have to kind of really zero in on which applications, what the conditions were or circumstances.
So I'm pleased that you're willing to look at that because
I am.
you can tell just on the surface if that's correct, that's not good. I've been told that EPA has effectively threatened by phone to ask them to suspend or withdraw their applications. I'm going to take your word for it that you don't have any knowledge of this, but I would like you to look into it and come back and share with us your findings because, as you can see, that would be hugely problematic.
I commit that to you.
Excellent, thank you. For those watching, Section 26 of the TSCA permits EPA to charge user fees of 25% of this program's budget's cost. In the last years, I mentioned that you've increased those fees 14-fold and recently doubled it. Now turning to your budget, the EPA's estimate of TSCA direct costs are substantially more than the 25% of the appropriated budget. So, won't surprise you, but I'm perplexed about how you can spend that money if it's not coming in. In other words, in EPA's view, that it can charge fees of 25% predicted regardless of the cost?
I'd have to look into that. I mean, I want to really interrogate this assertion because I'm not quite sure we agree on the premise of where this is coming from. And I think we need to take a look at, number one, the performance over the past 3 years with the increased budget that we did receive, which, the number of new chemicals we're reviewing each month has doubled. We've cleared backlogs. So we need to reconcile what you're saying in terms of our performance over the past 3 years versus these fees and charges. And I'd love to have a deeper conversation about that.
I invite that conversation because this is important. It's important for your agency. It's important for America. There's been a lot of discussion today about a cleaner future. Much of these ideas could lead us to that, and the fact that they're being backlogged and then having the problem of being withdrawn without the fees being returned. And I appreciate your commitment to do that, whether it's with me personally or back here in this committee room. I welcome that and look forward to those conversations.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan, Representative Dingell, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you here, Administrator Regan. I suspect you may have wanted to have been in a dental chair more than today, but I hope it hasn't been that bad. I know that there's already been some discussion, but I would like to talk about the vehicle emission standards starting there. Obviously, many of us care about the future of the automotive industry and keeping it here in the United States and keeping the jobs here. And we got to accelerate the domestic development, manufacturing, deployment of EVs and other types of technology. We should be talking about hydrogen and others, which you and I have, to achieve our climate goals, but also maintain our competitiveness with China and other countries. We're competing in a global marketplace, as you and I both know. It's also equally crucial that we ensure that the hardworking men and women who have built the auto industry are not left behind in the transition, and that everybody has access and can buy an electric vehicle, afford it, and be able to charge it. And we want to make sure these vehicles of the future are made here in the United States of America. As we shift towards these clean vehicles, concerns have been raised, some by my colleagues, about a just transition and how we aren't going to leave anyone behind. How do you plan to continue to work with the automakers, labor unions, state and local governments to ensure a just transition and implementation of EPA's vehicle emission standards?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for your leadership on this topic, especially helping us connect the dots to the labor and auto workers, to the industry, and those communities that we don't want to leave behind. Listen, as you know, we have really engaged the auto industry to look at the goals of these performance standards. They themselves are indicating that they're diversifying their fleets, their cars are becoming much more affordable, but by no means is this an EV mandate. We are really looking at a stronger penetration of plug-in hybrids, hydrogen, more efficient internal combustion engines. We believe that we're offering the industry the right combination of products to meet and potentially exceed the emission reduction goals that we've set. And we believe that we can do it bringing everyone along.
That's important. I may ask you some more questions for the record on that so we can establish the record on some of the work that's been done. Since you walked in the door of this job, you know that I always talk about water. Safe and affordable water is a basic human right. However, communities with aging infrastructure all across the country, many in Michigan, have faced both lead and the pervasive threat of forever chemicals known as PFAS. I thank you for the work that you've done. You said you were going to do it. I'm pleased that EPA's final drinking water and PFAS Superfund designation rules are strong and that they build on standards which are part of our bipartisan PFAS Action Act. It's been long overdue. Can you tell us, as EPA implements these rules, how do you plan to work with local communities, water systems, and other stakeholders on the ground to ensure that these standards are met and that all Americans have access to safe drinking water?
Well, absolutely. Number one, this final rule will protect over 100 million people who are drinking water in this country. Most of the water systems in this country are already meeting the standard, but we are working with the communities that are not, providing technical assistance. We have money that flow through traditional programs. Thanks to your leadership and the President's leadership and to Congress, we have billions of dollars to help smaller water systems, rural water systems, not only comply with this rule, but just provide safe, affordable drinking water to every single person in this country. So there's a combination of technical assistance, bill and IRA dollars, as well as our traditional budget that will ensure everyone is drinking clean water and no one's overburdened, and it's done in an affordable way.
Thank you. I've got 48 seconds, so I'm going to ask you quickly because I'm very proud of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and the Republicans keep making attacks on it. Can you explain how these funds allow EPA to continue to provide strong oversight of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and why it does matter?
Well, it matters because Congress granted us the $27 billion to ensure that we could have everyone in this country, low to moderate income, Black and brown and tribal communities, participate in the low carbon economy. We're going to take this $27 billion and pull hundreds of billions of dollars of private capital off the sideline to invest in affordable clean energy. We want to have the right staff to implement this program, and so we need the staff because we didn't get that staffing resource from the Inflation Reduction Act. We got the resources to design the program. Now we need to maintain the program. We've also asked for resources for our Inspector General so that we can continue to partner in terms of oversight and ensuring that it's done the way it was intended to be done.
Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Representative Openoti, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Administrator Regan, thank you very much for your testimony today. I'd like to discuss something that is of vital consequence to my constituents in California's 23rd District. Recently, the California Air Resources Board applied to the EPA for a waiver that would allow them to implement what they call the in-use locomotive rule in California. They're seeking to require all line locomotives to operate in a zero emissions configuration starting in the year 2035 and to prohibit the use of any locomotive that's older than 23 years old. The problem with that is that there are currently no locomotives available that are even close to meeting the definition of that requirement. If you just look at the amount of energy required to move the weight that those locomotives move, a diesel locomotive has the equivalent of about 100 megawatt hours of energy. The best all-electric locomotives that we have now that are in testing are around the order of 5 to 8 megawatt hours. So we're not even close to even having a locomotive available that will meet that rule. Another problem, and this is one that affects my constituents directly, is that BNSF Railways is in the process of constructing a new $1.5 billion intermodal transfer facility in my district in the town of Barstow. That's going to add about 20,000 jobs to my district. It's also going to have the effect of taking millions of truck hours off the roads in California, because it will allow freight to be offloaded off of ships in the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, transferred by rail to the intermodal facility in Barstow, and then distributed by rail to other parts of the country instead of being on trucks. And as I'm sure you're aware, given your position, it's about 10 times more efficient to transport freight by rail than by truck. It's much less carbon in the atmosphere. It's better for everyone to do this. The problem is if the EPA approves CARB's waiver request, BNSF is not going to build that transfer facility in Barstow because they would be required to have all-electric locomotives that don't exist. And so they're going to put that facility in Arizona. So in a way, I should thank CARB. I've gotten more constituent engagement on this issue than on any other issue in my 19 years in elected office. And I brought you a little gift here. This is several thousand letters from my constituents that they've written in, all of them opposing the waiver request from CARB that they would need to implement this. So first question for you, can you tell me what the timing is on the EPA's ruling on the waiver request on this issue?
Well, I can tell you that all of the issues that you've raised, we're hearing as well. And listen, by law, California has the right to submit these waivers. There are 8 waivers that are before us, including this locomotive waiver. And so we're working with CARB to try to prioritize these waivers because they require, as you've just laid out, a lot of technical rigor and the appropriate resources to make the right decision. I'll have my team follow up with you on the timing for all of the waivers, including locomotive. But I can tell you that we're going through a very thorough evaluation right now, and we've got a lot of things to consider.
Thank you. Do you have a timing on whether or not, on when you're going to make a decision on the waiver?
I'll have our teams connect on that. I don't have the specific timing of that waiver and where it is in that process.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
As you have just pointed out, CARB has the right to make the request, but the EPA has the right to approve or deny the requests. And the Clean Air Act explicitly preempts state regulation of interstate commerce assets such as locomotives. Why on earth would we as a federal government allow a state to create their own regulations? I mean, wouldn't that, when we have 50 different state regulations on locomotives, wouldn't that completely destroy our ability to have a locomotive go from state to state?
Well, one of the reasons that we are spending time and giving careful consideration to these waivers is I have pledged, and so have my team members, to follow the science and follow the law. We have to be sure that any action that we take does both of those things, especially follow the law. And so we're giving some careful consideration to these waivers. They're going through the evaluation process. I don't want to get ahead and project or predict whether we're going to deny or approve. I will say that we're going to go through a thorough process. It'll be transparent, and I'd love for our staffs to keep working with yours on where we are in the process to be as transparent as possible.
Well, I look forward to doing that, and happy to partner with you on that issue. I am confident that if we follow the science, it's going to be very clear that, first of all, the technology to implement this does not exist, and second of all, that forcing freight off of ports onto trucks instead of being transported by rail is actually much worse for the climate than trying to force electric locomotives that we currently don't have the technology to comply with in the first place. So I've sent yesterday a letter to you signed by 74 members of Congress. Every single member of the Republican California congressional delegation has sent you a letter on this issue. Over half of the members of this committee have sent you a letter on this issue, including all of the Republican members. And so I would ask that you work with us on this and recognize the serious consequences of allowing CARB to go forward with this very misguided proposal.
You have my commitment to work with you all, be transparent and be fair. And so we're going to, again, go through this process, evaluate it very carefully, and there will be no surprises. We'll
Right.
keep you-
I look forward to that. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Okay, I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the documents included on the staff hearing documents list. Without objection, so ordered. I remind members that they have 10 business days to submit questions for the record, and I ask the witnesses to respond to the questions promptly. Thank you, Administrator, for being here today, for your diligence. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.